So good morning, everybody, and welcome to the FSA September board meeting, which is being held in Belfast in Northern Ireland. We've got apologies today from Junior Johnson, and so I'm delighted to welcome Richard Wynne-Davis, who's head of our operational assurance and excellence in his place. Most board members will be familiar with Richard from his appearances with the board previously. I should also note that we're in the process of recruiting Ruth Nolan's successor as our Director of Corporate Services. So in the meantime, we're joined by Ed Cliff, who is the Deputy Director of Finance, Planning and Commercial. Ed is not actually with us in the room today, but you'll be able to see him online. So welcome to you, Ed. I'm also absolutely delighted to welcome 4 of our 5 new board members, Louise Host, Claire Evans, Steve Ruddy and Frank Atherton, who were appointed to the board on the 1st of August and have been delighted to have a little bit of time to get to know them and to introduce them to the work of the FSA over the last month or so. Our 5th new member, Sue Patterson, sends her apologies, but she had a prior commitment overseas and is not able to be with us today, but has obviously had access to all of the papers. We do have a 6th board member who has been appointed, and she will join the board in November, and so her first board meeting will be with us in December. This is also 2 of our members' last meeting, Mark and Margaret, ahead of the end of their term of appointment in November. I have to be honest, I can't really imagine this board table without Margaret and Mark around it, because they've been here since before I was. They've both given me huge personal support, particularly when I was settling in as chair, and I'll be forever grateful for the warm welcome and all the help you gave me. I think it's fairly true to say that the 2 of you and Tim, who was appointed at the same time, have seen the FSA through a really extraordinary period of quite profound change for the agency, starting with Brexit, then of course dealing with the COVID pandemic, the war in Ukraine, the series of government changes that we had, and now of course helping us to prepare for the EU reset. Thank you for your wisdom, your insights, and really all that you have brought to the board. You will both be hugely missed. I mean, Margaret, you've been such a consumer champion, and particularly in relation to food allergies. I think you can leave confident that the board will have your voice sort of ringing in their ears and sitting on their shoulder every single time the issue of food allergy comes up. But I think it's also important to remember you've done so much more than that. You've been hugely helpful in helping us to reform our incident planning. And I know have given great support to the comms team, drawing on all your past experience. So you will be hugely missed, and our new board members have got a lot to live up to. Thank you. And then Mark, I mean, another person who's had such given us such particular insights and expertise in relation to the local authority landscape, but particularly in relation to enforcement. And I always know there are items on the agenda when the whole board will really look to you to sort of hear from your experience on the ground and to give us some strategic direction about how we can best tackle these issues. I think probably your work on enforcement has been the most consequential for what the board have considered, whether that's around local authorities, the work at the borders, but especially NFCU. And I know that all the staff in the National Food Crime Unit are hugely grateful to you for the support and the advice that you've given them. You've really played that role of both support and critical challenge to their work. You've also, again, nobody gets to do only one thing on this board, and you've made such a difference to the work and the thinking behind the enterprise level regulation, and that again is a project which has got some way to go yet, and I know that you'll be watching it as it develops. But thank you for really getting that on the road. I am sure, well, I absolutely know I speak on behalf of the whole board in saying you will be missed, and thank you so much for all you've done. Your term of office is not quite up yet. You're not leaving us till November, and the board does have a private retreat in October, which will be your last opportunity to really give us the benefit of your wisdom before you go. It's unfortunately a day of goodbyes, because this is also our CSA, our Chief Scientist, Robin's last board meeting. Robin is leaving imminently at the end of this week, but fortunately Robin isn't going too far. He's taking up the post as the Interim Chief Scientific Officer at UKHSA. Again, Robin, thank you for everything that you've done for the FSA. You've been incredibly sort of solid voice on science. You've given the board real confidence and absolutely played that role of bridging between the executive and the board. And that's not always an easy part to play. We're also especially grateful to you for the work that you have done, not just in advising us, but also communicating our science to the outside world. And, where we only need to look at the very recent examples. And of course, here in Northern Ireland, Not Nay comes immediately to mind. So thank you for all the work on that. But across the UK, the work talking to consumers, and particularly to parents, around the risks of glycerol in slushy drinks has really been very, very valuable. And of course, it's just the tip of the iceberg of what you've been doing for the last 5 years. So thank you. We're very, very pleased you're not going too far away. And whilst I hope that we don't have a big food incident to deal with together, I am at least reassured that you'll be there with us through that. So thank you, Robin, and very, very best wishes for your time at HSA. After all of those comings and goings, we'll really press on with the main agenda items. We've received 5 questions from members of the public in advance of this meeting, which relate to items on the agenda, particularly the science paper, the local authority paper, and a couple of questions in relation to the ARAC Chair's report. We will try to pick up on those during the course of the discussion, but whether or not we'll provide written responses as usual, and those will be part of the board papers. All of the questions have been published on our website, and board members have all had an opportunity to consider them in advance of this meeting. So I will now proceed to the next item, which is really to ask if any members of the board, whether our sort of long-standing members or our newer members, have any interests that they want to declare. I should note that all of the members' interests are available on our website, and that includes all the new board members, so you can view those there. But if there's anything which has not previously been declared, which has happened recently, then this is the moment to say so. Okay, and then the second item in relation to declaration of interests is whether there is anybody who has interests which they have declared but which are particularly pertinent to items on today's agenda. I would note that most of the agenda items today are annual updates rather than policy or decision-making moments, so I think it's less likely there are conflicts. Okay, thank you very much. So in which case, I'll just ask if anybody has any matters that they want to add to the agenda for us to cover in any other business later. No, cracking through. So we'll turn our attention now to the minutes of the last board meeting, which was in June. Are people happy to accept those as a record of the last meeting? Those few people who were there, few board members who were there. All content? And then let's turn to the actions. Most of these, as you'll see, are complete, but there are a couple that are still ongoing. One relates to the lessons learned from incidents, and one on local authority performance, where discussions with stakeholders are still ongoing. Both of these I'm expecting to come back to the board later this year. But are there any, does people want any more clarification on any of those items? If not, we will press on to my update. So this is really just an opportunity for me to fill in board members and indeed everybody who's attending here today or watching online about some of the things that have been going on over the last few months since we were together. And to have a little bit of a look ahead as to what comes next. I'd like to start by just saying how great it is to be back here in Northern Ireland. And yesterday, Monday, I spent most of the afternoon at Stormont, was able to meet with ministers there and to discuss the work that we do with them, but also to hear some of the things that are important to them to ensure that the FSA is really delivering on things that matter for the people here in Northern Ireland. I really do value the engagement that we have, particularly with Minister Muir and Minister Nesbitt, and I hope that will continue for a good while. Thinking backwards, despite the sort of recess, feels like it's been a pretty busy summer for the FSA, and indeed I think many people across government would say the same thing, because there's been lots of activity still ongoing, not least all the work on the planning for EU reset. As we've discussed previously, the work on SPS has very significant implications for the FSA's work streams and for all of our business planning. And I've been talking in detail with Katie over the summer about how we ensure continued progress on our core responsibilities, while at the same time setting up our detailed planning for the future. You'll also be aware of recent ministerial changes which impact fairly notably on the FSA, particularly the departure of Minister Zeichner from DEFRA and his replacement by Dame Angela Eagle. I really do want to thank Daniel Zeichner for all the work he did on food for the benefit of consumers. It was something he cared deeply about, and he was he's done a lot of work in establishing and laying the groundwork for the food strategy. I have, of course, also written to Dame Angela and look forward to meeting and working with her, and of course the new Secretary of State at DEFRA, Emma Reynolds. Talking of the food strategy, it was really good to see the initial outline document published in July, which was called the Good Food Cycle. We also saw the publication of the government's 10-year health plan in July, and importantly for the FSA, that included announcement on healthy food standards and reporting for large businesses. I've been very clear to ministers that the FSA is very supportive of this. We do think this will be a good step forward for consumers in driving progress towards a healthier food system. And we really stand ready to help them in any way we can to support the delivery of this important policy. Meanwhile, I'm also pleased to say we've been making really good progress on our commitments as part of the Chancellor's Regulators Action Plan. You can see the progress report as part of the papers that are included from the Business Committee, and we discussed that at the Business Committee meeting last week. I'm really pleased we're making excellent progress there. And I think the work that we're doing to support businesses on regulatory applications, particularly for cell-cultivated products, is being very, very well received by industry. So I'm very keen that we continue pushing forward with this work. And I should probably actually just make a side note of particular thanks to Robin, who's really helped to get that innovation hub off the ground and to build such good relationships with stakeholders. I'm pleased to say we've got an excellent team working on that, led by Tom Vincent, and I'm very confident, Robin, that work will continue even after you've gone. On that note, I'm going to be speaking at an event next week at Imperial College with Minister Vallance to launch the Market Authorisation Innovation Research Programme, and we'll send details to the board about that after the event. It's also been a sort of busy summer of engagements with ministers, MPs and indeed stakeholders, not least because it saw the launch of our annual report on food standards, and we held events in Westminster, in Cardiff and here in Belfast. I was really pleased to be joined by ministers at each of those events, which also helped to mark our 25th anniversary. It was a great opportunity, I think, to remember the world before the FSA, when confidence and public trust in food safety was at quite a low ebb. And it was really gratifying to hear the sort of comments from stakeholders about the impact that the FSA has had in a very positive way on their business and also on the general trust in the food system. What I did during those meetings was also to reflect on some of the sort of kind of milestone moments of things that the FSA has delivered over those 25 years, which include setting off the work on reformulation of foods with the reductions in salt, which was right back in 2004. And that, of course, laid the foundation for so much of the health policy that's followed. In 2010, we introduced the Food Hygiene Rating Scheme and the start of, set off the work which led ultimately to the start of the traffic light nutritional labelling scheme. 2014, we established the National Food Crime Unit. We've been thinking of that particularly because I was at Queen's University yesterday, seeing the centre that was set up there by Chris Elliott, who of course was an important part in the formation of the NFCU. And then perhaps the thing that I think of most recently as being a real milestone was the implementation of Natasha's Law in 2021. And it's great to see that that is now really embedded in businesses, and I think has been a really vital part in encouraging much greater attention to allergen management in the food system. So on that note, I think that I will stop, but very happy to answer questions on any of those things or any other matters that you want to ask about. Margaret.
Susan, thank you for your kind words, and it's been a pleasure and a privilege. I'm really proud to have been involved in the FHRS right back from the beginning. And I do think it's the FSA's greatest achievement in changing behaviour to the benefit of society. So that's one thing. Secondly, I'm also proud, amongst other things, that we, as a board, have advised ministers about Owen's Law to put allergen information on menus in restaurants. Some restaurants already do that anyway, voluntarily. But there are two things that ministers haven't mandated and put into law. So my question is, will you continue to push for that to happen?
I absolutely will, Margaret. As you can imagine, as I mentioned, I've written to new ministers and set out the work of the FSA, but most importantly have really emphasised how keen I am to meet with them. And I've had a bit of practice in introducing the FSA to new ministers now, and firmly in my script is to run through the things where the FSA board has recommended action could be taken, but where we're dependent on ministers taking that forward. So absolutely, that remains on our agenda. Okay, if there's nothing more, then I'm going to hand over to Katie to give her Chief Exec's report. Thanks.
Thank you, Susan. I fear everyone's saving up their questions for me. Morning, everybody. I'm very happy to take questions on anything in the Chief Exec's report and indeed anything else that is relevant you want to ask about, but I just wanted to highlight a few parts of it and update on a couple of issues as well that have arisen since the report. The first thing to mention which is right at the start of my report, one of the most important things that we do is monitor levels of foodborne disease so that we can take action to try and reduce them. And to help us in that work, we set thresholds for 4 main pathogens with the board, and we've agreed a process with the board that's triggered when those thresholds are breached. We updated the thresholds very recently, and I'm now formally reporting to the board that the thresholds for Salmonella and Campylobacter have been breached. So we have triggered that process of investigation that we have agreed to do. There are more details in the annex to my report. It's quite unusual for me to do an annex, but I thought it was helpful to set out for the board what's happened and what we're doing. But the key point is that we now have work underway to investigate and understand more about the causes of those increases, and we'll be coming back to the board on that, and of course on any action that needs to be taken as a result. I also have an update on incidents. I'm pleased to be able to say that the botulism incident that's mentioned in my report has been de-escalated from non-routine and is now in the process of being closed. This had been a serious outbreak in which 700 cattle had died, and we've been working with UK HSA, the Animal and Plant Health Agency, DEFRA, and the Welsh Government colleagues on it. The affected animal feed has all been traced, and all the affected parties have been contacted. All the animals affected by the outbreak have been kept out of the food chain. And testing has also now confirmed that this is a strain of botulism which does not affect humans. I think this is one of the fastest turnarounds we've had on a non-routine incident, so I'm very pleased to be able to report that to the board. And it is helped in part by some of the improvements we've introduced in our new case management system, so that it's good to see that working in practice. There are also several things I wanted to highlight in the trade and borders part of my report. The first is just to repeat, as it says in the report, that we've launched a call for evidence on the India trade deal, which closes on the 26th of September. So in case anyone is watching the board who has not yet contributed to that, we would very much welcome views. More generally, there's been a lot happening in relation to borders. The board last considered the borders target operating model in May. I'm going to get my months right. In March, with the full paper. And since then, obviously, we've had the announcements about an SPS deal with the EU, and DEFRA has paused the introduction of extra border checks on specific imports for the EU, which were the next phases of that. We've also had 2 reports from the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Parliamentary Committee related to borders. The first one on illegal imports is covered in my report. And the second one only came out on Monday. And that covers commercial imports and considers the implementation of the BTOM. And it raises a set of concerns for DEFRA, particularly around areas like digital systems and data. And it makes recommendations to DEFRA on those and on implementation. As I mentioned, the board last really took stock of implementation of the BTOM in March. I have got it right now. And in fact, the committee does quote our board paper in several places in the report, so I'm glad that we've been able to contribute to the evidence there. In that paper, we raised some of those implementation challenges, and the board concluded that implementation of the BTOM had put us in a better position to manage public health risks from imported food over the past year, but more needed to be done on issues like IT systems and data quality and sharing. So some of these recommendations are very much in keeping with what the board has said there. We also talked about illegal imports in that session, and the board concluded that we should engage with DEFRA about the development of a strategic approach to address illegal imports, which is incidentally what the EFRA committee has also recommended. And I think since that board meeting, there has been better join up across government, across Whitehall on the issue. But we obviously stand ready to play our part in that strategy and are doing all we can already on it. It'll be for DEFRA to respond to those reports, but we'll work very closely with them on the response. And finally, in my introduction, I'd also like to add, on behalf of the executive, our thanks to the board members who are leaving us, and also to Robin, who has made a huge contribution to the FSA and to public health in those roles. I've said my goodbyes to Robin, so I will not repeat what Susan said. Suffice to say, he's a brilliant scientist, he's a brilliant communicator, but he is also someone who's willing to go the extra mile for public health and for the FSA. So I think it was very fitting that what I really hope is his last media interview for the FSA was on the Stephen Nolan show on Loch Ney here in Northern Ireland. I think it's a fitting end to his time with us. So thank you, Robin. Thank you, Margaret, and thank you, Mark.
And thank you, Katie, for that. Yeah, absolutely huge amount of work. There's a couple of things I guess I want to just sort of note and pull out. One was, given we're here in Northern Ireland, concerns about Loch Ney have been extremely significant. And I think the FSA has done some really good work. I'm very pleased that we've been able to do rapid risk assessments to really keep on top of that and to give that advice to consumers. When I was with Minister Muir on Monday, he made particular note of his thanks to FSA for their work in that area. And I really just want to add my thanks to that. Second point is you mentioned the EFRA committee report. Just to say to board members, I had a sort of very informal catch up with Alistair Carmichael, the chair of that committee, at our annual report launch, and I'll be meeting with him I think next month as one of my regular catch-ups in his role as chair of the EFRA committee, so I'm sure we'll discuss this more. And likewise, I also had a very informal meeting with Leila Moran, who's chair of the Health Select Committee. And what I'm quite encouraged by is there's very good join-up between EFRA and the Health Select Committee when it comes to matters pertaining to the FSA, which makes a lot of sense, so I'll pick up on some of that. And also, I have had conversations with Baroness Heyman, who's the Minister in DEFRA, who's responsible for the borders. And there is now, well, there has been over the summer, a much more active much more activity across government, I think, is the best way of describing it, in terms of trying to really get a stronger grip on this.
On the EFRA committee, I should probably say that Jeff Ogle and I have been called to give evidence to the committee in October, so I'm sure we will also be picking up on this formally and in public.
Yeah, so I think that's something we'll probably come back to at a later stage. And then the other thing I just wanted, Katie mentions about InfoSan, which is the WHO network which tells us about food safety incidents. We've been concerned about the funding for that, and I'm really pleased to see in your report that that has now been secured at least to the end of 2027. I don't think we should see that as being a resolution. I think we should see it as buying us some time in order to help get to a much more secure footing for InfoSan, which is so important for the global effort. And I know that's something that you've been picking up with colleagues who are heads of other food safety agencies. And then finally, thank you very much for alerting us to the breaches of the foodborne disease thresholds. I'd be keen for us to have a specific discussion about that. It's good to see the action plan for what to do. I'm slightly concerned that it doesn't look like we're making this a great priority. It looks quite a slow timeline to me, and so I'd quite like a little bit more information about quite why we can't get on the case a bit quicker over that. So those are some points from me. Can I suggest we pick up on the foodborne disease thing first, and then we'll come on to any other points that people have. Frank.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Katie, for the report. On the exceedances of thresholds, I take your point, Susan. I think we do need a deeper discussion on it. But although in the annex I could see that the rates have gone up for the various GI infections, what I didn't see was the kind of could it be an effect of more testing? So we need to kind of drill into some of that, of course. And I suppose the other question that arises is how much of it is domestic and how much of it is imported, given that people are travelling more than they did, post-COVID, etc. But perhaps those are questions that we need to pick up in the longer term in the further discussion. Thanks, Chair.
Any other points on this? And then Margaret.
Yeah, it's obviously disappointing to see the breaches. It's also disappointing that really over the past 20 years, the drafts haven't changed much. In other words, we haven't really been making impact. And it is an important area because there are deaths related to some of these. And I just wanted to say it's good to see that in the science report, it has been listed as a priority, and I think it's really important that that priority must be kept as a priority.
Thank you. There's nothing more on that. I think actually I might just ask Robin to comment on this point about, is this about increased detection, which is a conversation we've had a couple of times.
Yeah, thanks, Susan. And I can see that Judy and Rebecca might want to come into. On the so yes is the short answer. This could well be. I mean, detection has changed significantly in two ways. In particular, the kind of better use of PCR to identify to highly specific levels, and the other part of that is what you're sampling. So, for example, fecal and non-fecal isolates, which weren't previously always done. So part of it is about detection. I think that's not enough to explain the rise. There is also a real rise, I think. And as you said, Frank, I mean, there are lots of possible reasons there, and that's one of the reasons that we've got multiple lines of investigation ongoing at the minute. EFIG work, we've asked our Science Council to comment, and we have, as you've seen, some behavioural work too, because there could be one or many of lots of different explanations. So travel and out-of-home eating is one possibility, changes in kind of domestic cooking practice is one, changes in source, import of different raw materials, and actually things like climate. The climate has changed significantly, and that impacts both on growers, and so the risk at source, but also on people's behaviours. We eat differently when it's hot and sunny and not, and we really need to dial into that, I think, to work out which ways we can kind of intervene. But I don't know if others want to comment too. Thanks.
Rebecca.
Yes, thank you, Susan. I just want to assure the board that this is a priority for us. It's one of the most important things that the Food Standards Agency does to try and improve the impact of foodborne disease. So as soon as we were aware of the breach of the thresholds, we triggered the process that we'd agreed with the board earlier this year. Obviously, we need to understand more about the causes, as Robin has said, and that work is ongoing. But in the meantime, we continue with all of the things that we do in order to take action to support both agencies and organisations, particularly those dealing with vulnerable groups. So we continue our work to improve guidance for the NHS and for other organisations which look after vulnerable groups. We continue with our public information and ongoing work with our comms team to support people in the home as well, so that they know how to keep themselves safe. And we've also got our ongoing work, as Robin has mentioned, with the sort of the better detection of foodborne disease. What we do know, as I think Robin said, is that this doesn't seem to be an artifact of detection, and that's why we've triggered our next steps interventions.
Rebecca, can I just press a bit more on that? So I know the Science Council are doing a piece of work which was in train anyway around why food-borne disease levels have remained elevated. The point that Margaret made, we discussed this when we had the paper on foodborne disease, despite all of our efforts. So the Science Council are looking at that, and in fact, just to say to board members that when we have our retreat next month, John O'Brien, the chair of the Science Council, will be coming to talk to the board about that work. So we can catch up with him then. But aside from that, Rebecca, what is it that we are doing that is going to take, another however many 6 months or so?
So the new group that we've set up, the epidemiology of foodborne disease, is, they have set out a programme of research that they feel is necessary in order for us to actually understand what has happened to foodborne disease rates. I mean, these things are not it's not straightforward to establish, what's behind an emerging trend like this. And, I will take the advice of our committee of experts.
But what are they going to do? So the research exists, they need to look at that and come to a conclusion. Or are you suggesting, which I don't understand why it can't be done more quickly, or are you suggesting that they are commissioning new work which is going to tell us, and if so, what?
The latter. So in the initial meeting, what they will have done is they will have worked with colleagues across government to scope out the research questions that need to be answered, and they will then be commissioned out. So I'll need to come back to you with more detail about the timetable for that.
And I've set out in the annex to the report several pieces of work that are coming to fruition at various points between around December and spring next year, which will feed into our thinking. I mean, it's not going to be a neat process where we do a certain set of research and then we have all the answers. It will be a continuing process. We've suggested coming back in March because at that point we think some of those additional pieces of work will be done and we will know enough to have a much better discussion with the board. So that was our view. There's a balance, isn't it, between coming back as quickly as we can and having as much evidence as we can.
Okay, well, please just keep us in touch in the meantime, rather than just waiting for some, this is something also, Robin, that I know is a sort of joint interest with UK HSA. So, we look forward to continued working there. Okay, let me broaden this conversation out now to any other questions to Katie on her report. And I think Mark's first out of the blocks.
Thank you, Susan. Just a couple of completely different points, if I may, Katie. Firstly, in relation to glycerol or glycerol, I can never quite work out how you pronounce it. I welcome what's in the report in relation to that, and there's some really good work there, particularly broadening our communication channels in relation to the measures that we discussed at our last meeting. At our last meeting, however, those things were discussed in the context of them being kind of interim measures, and Robin very effectively highlighted for us some gaps in our knowledge around this product and the safety and the implications of it. So I just wonder what progress we're making on closing those gaps and actually understanding whether this product is safe at all, let alone with the restrictions that we have put in place in the interim period. And my other point is that I just wanted to welcome the fact that we now have our consultation published in relation to CBD products. That represents, I think, in my view, quite significant progress in this space, which is something which has been going on for a while. And I'm just seeking reassurance, having read the consultation, that the principles that we've discussed previously around the contamination with controlled drugs and the ALARA principles are going to be applied consistently across all applications, and then we're not going to allow any kind of competitive advantage or disadvantage by allowing people to detect these contaminants at different levels and therefore create a space where different products may have different contamination levels.
I'm going to just collect up a few questions and then come to Katie. Margaret.
Katie, I've got 2 or 3 actually, but some of them are yes and no answers. Adding to what Susan said about illegal imports, I mean, our borders are porous. There are products coming in illegally, including meat, including sweets that have stuff in them that they shouldn't. That is a public risk. You've spoken about this, it's FSA recommendation, I think it is, this task force. My worry about that is if there is this task force which is across the different agencies, will they all pass the buck and say it's somebody else's fault? How are you going to get somebody to take responsibility and really tackle it? And then slightly easier questions. Infosan and WHO, I think it is a worry with that pull of American funding, and I wondered how concerned you were or what you thought of that. And now that Minister Zeichner has gone, are you still going to carry on with your regular DEFRA-led meetings with industry? And then finally, allergen labelling, which actually came up in the Business Committee. In your paragraph 3 of the report to the Business Committee, you said you were concerned at some issues over allergen labelling. As you know, I think that is a life and death issue. Several people a year die from taking allergens, and those are preventable deaths. And we want to make the public aware of that. So I wondered if you could just fill us in on that.
Okay, accumulating quite a list here. Anything else? Steve.
Thank you. Just following on from Mark's comment in relation to the glycerol element of the paper, I just wondered if there'd been any early assessment of the impact of the new policy or new approach or new guidance that had been issued. I know it's relatively early days. And secondly, leading on from that, what more might be required to ensure safety or awareness in future in the light of that awareness or feedback? That's a link to Mark's question. And just secondly, in relation to the illegal imports element of the paper and the creation of the task force, I think it's very positive to engage the various government agencies as well, but I was also pleased to see the suggestion to include local authorities in that as well, because I think that's an important element which I hope will be taken forward. So thank you.
Thank you very much. On the glycerol evaluation, I suspect the answer will be it's probably still a little bit early days for that, but all I can say is that Katie and I have both made ourselves unpopular with family and friends by conducting our own little, not quite evaluation, but more enforcement of labelling. Katie, do you want to pick up on some of those points?
Yes, I will do. I'll pick up some of Margaret's first, and then I may bring in Rebecca to say a little bit about closing the evidence gaps on glycerol, unless Julie waves at me and says that's her, and to say something more on CBD. And then actually, I think Claire can tell us a bit about the evaluation of the impact. So on the task force that's mentioned in the EFRA committee recommendation, so this is just a recommendation at the moment from the committee. I think it's very much in keeping with what the board have said, the need for a cross-government approach, so we can absolutely support it. And the committee have said DEFRA should lead the work, which makes absolute sense given their responsibilities. So I think it is yet to be set up and yet to be made to work in practice, but all the points people are making are good ones about it, and we'll work with DEFRA to try and make it as effective as possible.
And I think the point that Steve made about involving local authorities is definitely one which we can really bring to DEFRA's attention, because they're probably higher on our radar than perhaps on DEFRA's.
Margaret's question about InfoSan, this has been a real concern for us. We rely on InfoSan as a way of communicating information about emerging incidents between countries. It's very important to us, and when it became clear that there may be a lack of funding in InfoSan as a result of the US withdrawal of funding, we've been doing a lot of lobbying with other countries, exploring solutions. Susan and I have both personally raised it with counterparts in a lot of international meetings. I'm really pleased that I'm able to say in the report that there is funding available for the immediate future, and that is a better position than we thought we were going to be in, but we still need a long-term solution. So yes, it's still a concern, and it needs to be something that we work on with our international partners. Margaret also asked about the meetings with industry and DEFRA. Yes, I believe those will continue. I think that has been something that has happened ever since the pandemic. It's not been something that was initiated by Daniel Zeichner. And as far as I'm aware, his successor will continue that. It's a very helpful forum. And then on the other questions, so I might, on CBD, first of all, generally, we approach each application on the basis of the evidence that's in it, obviously, and we also need consistency in our approach, and I will let Rebecca comment in detail on our handling of the risk management for CBD, which is a particularly complex area. I will also, I think, on glycerol, ask Rebecca to say anything about the closing of the knowledge gaps. As you recognised at the last meeting, Mark, we were clear just how little information actually we had about the effects of glycerol when consumed as a food, and we said it was important that we ask the industry to close that knowledge gap for us if they wanted to make the case that it was safe. So we can report on what's going on there. And then, Margaret, you asked about allergens in my report to the business committee. So I think I mentioned several incidents that had come up that we were dealing with, including a sort of cluster on Dubai chocolate. And we have done some consumer campaigns there, because one of the issues we were finding with Dubai chocolate, which was mislabeled, was a lack of proper allergen labeling. So I will ask Claire to say a little bit about what we've done on consumer campaigns there, and I think also from a comms perspective, she can say a bit about the evaluation we've done of glycerol so far.
Okay, so a sequence of people to comment there. Rebecca, probably makes sense to start with you.
Yeah, shall I start with glycerol? So I think, Steve, you asked about the interim approach and what would be happening next. So the board decision was that it was right for us to take a precautionary approach here. So we raised the age limit at which we have said glycerol is not suitable for young children. As Katie has said, it's for industry to demonstrate that their product is safe. And a number of stakeholders have said to us that they believe there is evidence that shows that the product is safe for younger children. It's for them to come forward with that. What we're doing is we're monitoring both the implementation of the guidance, looking to see what the take-up has been, and we believe that it's been very good. And obviously we will also monitor any further incidents, and we'll be doing a review over the coming months, and likely, I think, to come back to the board next spring with an update at the appropriate point.
Rebecca, I think the key question is, have industry come forward with information about the glycerol content of their products?
Well, so we have some evidence, and as I think Robin summarised that in our last board meeting, but they have not provided new evidence to support lowering that age limit again. So that's very much for them.
I think we were recognising at the last board that the evidence needed to be gathered first. I don't think industry sitting there with evidence, and we just haven't asked for it. I think that if they need more evidence, they will be needing to commission studies and so on. So I would expect that to be a slow process.
I don't think it does. Maybe. They know how much glycerol they put in their product. They don't need to commission anything. They know how much they put in, and they need to tell us.
I think we're talking at cross purposes. There was something about evidence on the levels of glycerol, but then there was something about the evidence based on the effects of it as well.
That's going to be incredibly difficult. But we did ask for more information, because at the last meeting it was clear we didn't even really know how much glycerol was in these products, and we specifically asked industry to provide that to us. But I know you've had some meetings with some of these companies, Rebecca, and they've just not volunteered that information.
Well, we have had some additional evidence from companies about the levels of glycerol in the products, but as I understand it, there are also still some questions about the mechanism for harms, and I think this is quite a complex area, but it is for industry to come forward and to give us, we need a comprehensive evidence base that would help us to reach a future decision to change that level.
Do you want to say something about the consumer campaign?
Yes, thank you, Susan. So just to touch on glycerol, first of all. So we launched a consumer campaign on the back of the new information that we were putting out to consumers, basically saying that children under 7 should not be consuming these drinks. That information, that campaign started just a few weeks ago, so we've only got our preliminary evaluation of that, which at the moment is primarily about the amount of press coverage that we've had. So we've had over 50 pieces of national press coverage. Robin did a slot on Good Morning Britain on the sofa for us, and in total 370 press articles so far. As I say, that's just the preliminary evaluation, because the campaign is kind of still playing out, so we'll be very happy to come back to board with a fuller evaluation once the campaign concludes. Susan, did you also want me to say a little bit in response to Margaret's question about allergies? Okay, so Margaret, I think you flagged Katie's reference in the business committee report to the activity that we had around the Dubai-style chocolate. So we've put out a warning to consumers about Dubai-style chocolate that was imported that may not have correct allergy labelling. That generated a huge amount of press coverage and interest. I think probably is one of the most high-profile stories of the year so far for us. So we've been able to really kind of maximise that warning. But we're also thinking about different audiences. So, of course, businesses are a key audience. And we have our current Safer Food, Better Business campaign, which is also reiterating the importance of the provision of allergy information. So we are pushing the allergy message kind of through all our different contact points.
Thank you. Steve, did you want to come back?
Yeah, just a comment. Great to hear about the reach of the media and the comms campaign. I think what I was getting at more, though, was any feedback about the impact of the campaign in terms of levels of sales, including, for example, from sort of local authorities are also sharing that information as well. So is it having, it's being communicated to an audience, but what impact is it having on the audience is more of my query, really. Thank you.
I think it's a little too soon for us to have that data. And the other thing I should mention is that sales of these slush ice drinks are highly seasonal, and so there's also going to be a seasonal effect. So that's another reason why it might take a little time for us to fully understand the impact.
I should note that since the last board meeting, we have been notified of another incident of a child with glycerol intoxication. I mean, we obviously don't know how many we're not hearing about, but that was in a 6-year-old, as I understand. So I think, there is still genuine cause for concern.
I was just going to add in response to Steve, it's often quite difficult, I think, for us to track the impact of our communications work in terms of on the impact on sales, or at least because often that's commercial data, which might not be available to us. But what we do is we conduct audience research at the beginning of a campaign to establish a benchmark of things like levels of awareness and understanding, and then we'll follow up at the end of the campaign so we can see the impact the campaign has had. So once we've done that, we're very happy to come back to board with those figures.
Rebecca?
I wondered if I could move on to CBD briefly, if we've concluded the glycerol item. Well, firstly, actually, just to thank Mark for his contribution to our development of the risk management advice on this, particularly from the enforcement point of view. And yes, as Mark has said, the ALARA principles will be applied consistently and in line with the accepted standards. I thought it would be helpful just to touch on one of the questions that we've had to the board. We've had a question about, can we give a date for when we'll make a recommendation to ministers? As people may know, we have recently published a consultation on a number of CBD products. I would encourage people to read the consultation. If you do so, you will see that these are more complex products, so we've discussed them regularly at the board, and we'll need to work through the responses to that consultation before we bring forward advice to ministers. It's not possible to commit to a specific date, but it's good that we're in this final stage now and the consultation is out there.
I think just to add to that, the consultation's out now, and so I would anticipate that by the December board that we should have a paper come to the board then, I think, summarising the consultation responses, which will also give the board a chance to comment and give a steer to Rebecca's team ahead of them finalising the risk management arrangements for CBD products. So I think we should take that as a particular action to bring CBD back in December. I would also note that we've obviously been working on this quite closely with Food Standards Scotland. FSS have not yet issued their consultation, although we're advised by them that they expect to do so very shortly. And as you know, we do try where possible to keep these things running alongside each other. But I think we'll have to review that again in December. Okay, so we've had a bit of a conversation about borders, about CBD, about glycerol, and about the thresholds, about Infosan. Are there any other items in Katie's report that people wanted to pick up on, or indeed any other matters that are ongoing? This is your chance to quiz the Chief Exec. Okay, if not, thank you, Katie, for that. As ever, very busy. Thanks for all you do to hold it all together. So now we move on to the individual papers for this meeting. And as is usual at our September meetings, we have a lot of annual updates on work that's been ongoing. Coincidentally, I hope that's helpful for the new board members to get a bit of an overview of some of the day-to-day activities. It also means that there are fewer decisions for the board to make, but it is an important moment for us to review the strategy and to issue any new strategic steers that we think are important. I also want us to pay particular attention to the priorities in each area for the coming year. That's especially important at this time when there are so many other competing pressures. So we need to be very clear what it is we're looking to deliver in each area over the coming year. Also very much looking forward to hearing the thoughts from new board members. It's always good to have a sort of fresh pair of eyes on some of this work. So we're going to start with the annual local authority performance report, and really pleased to welcome Karen McCloskey, who's the head of the Delivery Standards Unit, to the table, and also Nathan is with us. Is Nathan with us online? Oh yes, he is. Nathan Barnhouse, who's head of regulatory compliance, who's also with us. Local authorities are hugely important partners for us. They do so much of the work that is absolutely fundamental to underpinning food safety and indeed public trust in the food system. So it's incredibly important that we work together with them to deliver the best outcomes that we can. This is the annual update to the whole board. I'd just remind people that we do look at local authority performance every quarter as part of the business committee reporting, and that's much more about the sort of day-to-day management of the system. Here, I think we're trying to take a slightly higher level view to give us some assurance on how the whole system is operating. So, Nathan, are you going to introduce this item? Is that correct?
Yes, Chair, thank you. And Borda, good morning. Chair, if I may, I'd like to start with a response to question 2 to the board. With regard to the presentation of data on chart 10 in the report, the line for the UK overlaps and obscures the line for England. And we're going to look into how we can improve the presentation of that in future. There's a second part to the question which refers to the operation of FHRS in Wales, and we will provide a written response to that. So the performance paper outlines that local authorities continue to take a risk-based approach to official control delivery. We're seeing progress. Intervention rates are improving, although lower risk establishments remain below pre-pandemic levels. Following consultation, proposed changes to the hygiene delivery model aimed at easing pressures in the system without compromising public health will be laid before Parliament in October, subject to ministerial approval. Volumes of unrated businesses remain high. Although local authorities are tackling backlogs, this is against a backdrop of growing registrations, indicating that this is an area where we can expect to see continued pressure. The FSA in Wales is looking at the issues around registration, and we're considering how we can augment that work across the 3 nations as part of our thinking and what we need to do to adapt the regulatory system. Resourcing shows some sign of improvement, but remains a concern. Whilst we are seeing some increasing numbers, for example, because local authorities are using apprenticeships, this potentially masks the loss of competent, experienced officers from the system. In our engagement with local authorities, we're hearing reports of a potential cliff edge within the workforce age profile, and we're investigating the scale of this. We've seen a consecutive fall in national sampling rates, largely driven by England. We've limited information on the impact of this as we don't have access to data on incidents managed at a local level, that is before they reach us, nor the prevalence of underreporting by consumers. However, the data itself is indicative of a system under financial and resourcing pressure. More positively, our directed sampling programme continues to fund sampling where there is a known or suspected concern in relation to non-compliance. The standards delivery model rollout is a source of reassurance. Almost 99% of local authorities are now using the model, although 50% of those are waiting for a software update to complete their transition and be able to report. We were concerned about the progress of 4 LAs, but intensive engagement by our performance management team has secured assurance that they are making progress. In summary, Many of these performance indicators relate to how the regulatory system that was designed and resourced around 30 years ago is operating within today's challenges. We're at a point where moving the needle on issues such as resourcing, financial pressures and registration requires significant change as part of a planned approach to regulatory improvement across the 3 countries. As outlined in the paper, we intend to return to you with a fuller update on this thinking following engagement with stakeholders across the system. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I mean, it is good to see progress continues to be made, but it is slow, and there's still a very worrying backlog on unrated businesses. We've been saying this for a good while now. I'm beginning to feel a bit like a sort of broken record on it. So I'm quite keen to hear from the board their views on how we can improve the system for the future. I'm also interested in whether there's something that we can do to boost sampling, or at least to assure ourselves that the limited sampling that's going on is absolutely focused in the right places and targeted at areas of maximum risk. So those are the 2 things that really jumped out for me from this paper. But let me open this up to the rest of the board. Oh, Rhian.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Nathan. We discussed the paper at WFAC recently, and Nathan came and presented it, and there were a few comments that I wanted to make. So one was about unrated establishments, sharing that concern that we still have this very large number that's growing all the time. And we had some suggestions from WFAC about, always thinking creatively of trying to, think about solutions. And whilst the code might not allow for them at the moment, I think we should still keep thinking about them. So, for example, one of WFAC members suggested, could local authorities reset the clock on those lower risk D&E rated premises? Can we really carry on thinking about this problem?
What do you mean by reset the clock?
Well, I think for those establishments which are considered low risk, so they are deprioritised, is there a way to really stretch that out in terms of time so they don't get revisited for longer than, Now that itself creates a risk in the system that when lower rated premises are not inspected, their processes may evolve, but I think the principle being to let's carry on thinking about ways to try and address these unrated establishments. Connected to that, we're really pleased to hear about exploration of the enhanced registration concept. I know I believe it's 6 local authorities in Wales which are included in this exploratory piece of work, and it's definitely of ministerial interest in Wales to explore this topic, and that could be part of that basket of solutions. We talked about resource constraints, and there were some comments at WFAC about whether we can or whether we are fully using those that are leaving our profession, so retirees and leavers of the profession coming back in sort of a mentoring capacity as a principle, and there's certainly appetite to do it as far as WFAC is concerned. And then 2 final points. I think it relates to the question that was posed about the data. It was raised at WFAC about the Food Law Code of Practice in Wales being implemented differently, and whether the scoring in Wales therefore creates data sets that are quite comparable. So I wouldn't mind your thoughts on that, Nathan, as to whether the data sets are quite comparable, and it might help with the question that's posed to board. And then finally, the concerns on sampling are shared with you, Susan. I wouldn't mind your thoughts, Nathan, on what good looks like in terms of levels of sampling. Where are we aiming for? And are we learning everything we can from Northern Ireland? We seem to be doing it slightly, enjoying more success, but whether there's something particular in the system in Northern Ireland that allows for that would be really interesting to surface. Thank you.
Thanks, Rhian. Claire, I could see you were trying to come in.
Thank you for a very comprehensive paper. Whilst it's good to see improvements back to pre-pandemic levels on high-risk establishments, I do share some of the concerns that Rhiann's raised around sampling and resource levels, and I just had a couple of questions regarding resource. The first one is there a resource issue because there's an overall reduction in graduates and early careers in environmental science, food safety, food science? Or is the problem more that industry are attracting these candidates and local authorities just can't compete with these packages? And the second was really around, is there more that the FSA can do to promote these career routes? Thank you.
Thanks. Mark and then Steve. I'm going to sweep round.
I'm hoping Nathan's got a big piece of paper that he's scribbling loads of stuff down on here. But a few comments, and they're quite disparate, I'm afraid, Nathan, so no particular theme. I noticed in here that one of the challenges is around the number of new business registrations, both for environmental health and trading standards colleagues in meeting their duties to either inspect or intervene. And I'm also conscious from talking to those local authorities that a significant number of those people who register actually never start to trade. So I'm just wondering whether there's anything we can do in that space to discourage people registering who never start to trade, and whether that indeed might be linked to the other work that we're going on around funding some of these controls. Because actually, if you can do something for free, you perhaps don't place the value on it that you would if you had to pay for it, for example. There's a comment in the report which I really welcome around the resource tool that you've been working on and have been working on with local authorities. I think that's really exciting. It's something that the board asked for some time ago. I think it's really impressive that we're making contact. I would really love to know some more detail about what it looks like, what it contains, and what the feedback from those local authorities that you've engaged with is in relation to it. I understand it relates to hygiene at the moment, which is a great place to start. I too have concerns about sampling levels. I don't want to go too much into that because I think everyone's mentioned that. The risk in relation to sampling, particularly in relation to surveillance sampling, is that it means that we concentrate all our activities on stuff we already know about, and we risk missing the thing that we don't know about because we haven't identified it during surveillance sampling. I'm also aware that local authorities are required to have a sampling plan. But I'm also aware that that sampling plan could say we don't take any samples, and that would be acceptable under our current rules. And I think that's not the right place for us to be. And I wondered if there's something we can do in the contents of the code to make sure that a sampling plan makes it quite clear that to not do sampling is not an acceptable way, that it is incumbent on local authorities to do some level of sampling. I did pick up on this report, which I really welcome, the fact that it's got a lot of information in here about what we're doing, as opposed to merely reporting on what we've seen. I've mentioned already the resource tool. There's also some really good stuff in here about how we're supporting qualifications in the professions, and I really welcome that, as I have done before. I'm conscious that the Department for Health and Social Care, our kind of sponsor department, are funding some apprentices in the trading standards space, and whilst that's predominantly aimed at tobacco kind of controls, actually the kind of offshoot of that is that it will have a benefit in terms of number of officers who can undertake food official controls as well. Looks dangerously like joined up thinking on the part of government, but even if it's not, it's really to be welcomed. I do think, which leads me on to my last point around this comment which has already been made around career options. We have talked about that before at the board. At one of the visits we made several boards ago, I can't remember where it was, an industry spokesman said to us that actually careers in the food industry are not well publicised and made aware. When students express an interest in the food industry, they're often directed towards the hospitality sector. Whilst that's a vitally important sector, it's, there aren't many careers that you can't undertake within the food industry. So I just wonder whether we are working, perhaps either us as the FSA or across government, to broaden the appeal of the food industry for the whole range of careers, including the local authority careers that are the subject of this report. final risk in relation to that is that we are approaching a period of significant reorganisation in local government, where significant parts of the country will have their local government arrangements changed hugely with the disbanding of a huge number of councils. There are some real opportunities for us in that, where Trading Standards Service and Environmental Services are likely to come under the same roof, potentially, but there is a huge risk that huge numbers of our experienced professionals will take the opportunity to finish their career when their local authority ends its term. So I just want to make sure that we're aware of that and that we are taking appropriate action to try and make sure that that gap isn't any worse than it absolutely needs to be.
Thank you, Mark. Definitely quite a list there. Steve, do you want to add to it?
I think Mark's highlighted most of the things that I was going to say. So I'd endorse much of what Mark was saying. Maybe a slightly different angle on it in terms of, first of all, I wanted to welcome the report and also welcome the positive progress which I think is being made steadily rather than dramatically, but steady progress in a number of different areas, which I think is hugely positive, particularly bearing in mind there's ongoing financial pressures within local authorities and the relative level of recognition of environmental health trading standards and food work generally within local authorities. So I think that's positive, it's worth recognising. And I welcome the steps that the FSA are taking in terms of looking at the resourcing models. I'd be looking for more things about what the FSA can do about helping local authorities lobby internally for additional resources and helping the local authorities lobby other parts of government for resources as well. Mark's mentioned an excellent recent example with the Department of Health where there's particularly targeted funding to recruit a new tranche of apprentices across the field, which is really positive. And I think that has got the potential to be built on in other sectors. So I'd support looking at that. Having identified the positive progress, there are sort of issues and gaps and concerns still. I echo the comments about sampling. It is a concern that 65 local authorities have taken no hygiene samples, 58 local authorities have taken no standard samples. That does feel like an ongoing gap. I just wondered whether there's any learning from the success of the feed sampling programme, which has radically changed that environment over the course of the last few years. If there's any learning in relation to food sampling. I know things are not directly analogous, but there may be learning there that we can pick up on. I also echo the sort of comments and risks around workforce. There is an ageing demographic. In any event, local authority reorganisation will potentially lead to an increased exodus. The training in relation to trading standards officers and environmental health officers has seen a significant dip post-austerity, so it's not just the last 2 or 3 years, it's the last 15 years effectively, and that has led to a very ageing workforce. And I think that's beginning to be reversed through an apprenticeship programme and other training, but that needs to be continually supported, I think, as well. And I think there are opportunities in working with the professional bodies, the Chartered Trading Standards Institute and the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, to look at those workforce issues and also to help address some of the comments that Mark made in terms of making the career in both sectors and young people more aware of the career opportunities and more attractive as well. So I think there's a role for us there. I think the report sort of ends up with saying something along the lines of there's a complex interdependency of all of these different types of issues. So I'd welcome some thoughts and some feedback about where a more strategic approach could be brought back to the board, where there's an analysis of how these things can work together and what role the FSA might have in working with other partners to increase the situation. So there's a lot of excellent work within here, but I'd like to see something a bit more coherent and ideally a timescale when that would come back to the board.
Thank you, Steve. I think that's a good challenge there. We've got a lot of analysis of the problem here, but maybe not enough of the proposals for the solution. Louise.
Hello. I'd like to just say thank you to Nathan. It was a really helpful report, and also Karen. I think my comments are probably similar to some others, but the piece I really drew out was actually the feedback you'd had with the LAs in terms of actually having sessions and workshopping with them. And I wonder if there's more that you can do, maybe with a broader set of stakeholders to try and get to some of the solutions that we might need in this area. But it's because it seemed to actually generate quite a lot of comments and thoughts, but I then agree with Steve in terms of how do we get to what's the actual action plan that's timed, accepting that there's a lot of moving parts within it. My other thoughts were, where you're talking about increased units, is there a piece of work to do with the planning authorities? Because all of those premises are going to have planning permission. So is there something that we can connect that almost the local authority and the checking of the establishment has to be connected with the volume of planning applications? I don't know, but is that something that we could do? And then I agree with the questions really, I think, from the board in terms of the career. The retail food industry has a poor reputation at the same time in terms of how to bring people into the industry. Are there things that we can learn across both food manufacturing, food retail, that we can help the LAs bring resources in, because an ageing population is never going to help that in terms of how we facilitate new recruits into the industry. The only other piece, actually, going back to the sampling, we visited the port yesterday, and the one piece that really struck me was their dynamic sampling. And is there a way that actually local governments could use that dynamic sampling methodology that the ports are using to identify which units they should be attributing to, whether it's a unit or a type of food? It might help it be a bit more sophisticated.
Thank you. Some really good points there. Fiona and then Tim.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you to the team for the work that you've done to bring this quite challenging data set together. I think it's really important to flag that you're working with the teams on the ground during a period of transition. So actually getting us data is difficult. They've been very important in actually enabling us to have this data set. And I'll come back to the data in a minute because I think it's a challenge going forward. But I think that it's really also important to recognise this great working relationship that you have on the ground. And without that network, you don't actually know what's happening. And I think, as you said, Louise, it'd be really valuable to try and build on that and also build some of our connections out to the other professions that use our trading standards and environmental health officers, because they share that training pipeline and the workforce challenge, I'm sure. I wanted to comment mostly on the strategic piece, because we get good regular updates of the work that you're doing. We haven't yet seen a strategic plan that brings all of these pieces together. And a lot of them are quite challenging. We've got the bedding down of the food standards model. We've got the new food hygiene model to come through. We've got a challenge, therefore, I think, and this is a question, about whether we have a dual data system. Are we going to have one system reporting on the food standards through the new management information systems that are being put in place? But that will have to then flow in on the back of the food hygiene model when that gets implemented. So are we at risk of having a less substantial data set whilst that's bedded down? And my understanding is that will take for another couple of years or so. So we're probably going to be through until the end of 2027 until we actually get some more unified data set coming across the system, which is a worry. Do we correlate any of the data on incidents and interventions with those two data sets within the FSA? I don't know whether we can, and I don't know whether we do, but are they linked? On the workforce side, I think it would be really valuable to speed up as quickly as we can your mapping. I think particularly as Mark's flagged the restructuring in local authorities, could be very disruptive, and we need to make sure that we're carrying through the teams that we have so that their work cannot be overly impacted, and so that we can continue to do the day job on the ground. So I think the sooner we can get that workforce plan, it'd be really helpful to see how close we are to the tipping point that you flag. You know, are we there yet? When will we reach it, and how are we going to deal with that? And then the final piece is our internal resource. I think if we're going to have a strategic plan, we need to have it fully resourced. And I totally understand that there's very competitive demands within the organisation, but I think that it's really important that we recognise that this sector needs support through this transition period. There are lots of changes external to our work that are happening, as well as the programmes that we're leading. And I think it'd be really helpful to understand what extra resource you're going to need as teams.
Thank you, Fiona. That's really helpful. And I think you make some very good points there about the data systems, which are and the join up, and whether we're using the data to learn things as opposed to just collecting the data. Tim.
Thank you. A lot's been said, and I think there's some really valuable points. I guess at a slightly higher level is what can we do that's going to actually enable the system at a more strategic level. There is a real perception of risk, and is that risk realised? So when we're talking about data, the correlation with foodborne incidents, for example, and can we actually interpolate back from those to what's actually happening on the ground? Because I think there is an issue around public confidence here, and we really ought to be only dealing with where there is real risk. And of course here the issue is that we're looking at a retrospective report, and some of the benefit through the business committee, for example, is we've seen slightly more granularity and being able to look at this on a more frequent basis. And there is progress being made. I think with the food standards delivery model, for example, we've yet to see the full benefit of that, but it is progressing. So I would hate that we've intervened on something that's already in train and making traction. However, I do believe that there are real issues around surveillance and gathering real data on what is happening and getting the granularity around that. And the real elephant in the room is about resourcing and workforce. And that isn't going to go away in any short time, I don't imagine. So I guess my key point here is, can we actually look at some of the perhaps unthinkables, which is about full cost recovery. We certainly around official controls in other areas, that is an ambition. How is this in principle different? And are there other models around how we operate and stage our official controls in this area that actually are learning for elsewhere? So it is actually more about the strategic handling in the future and the capability that we have and local authorities have, that we need to have a more enduring model, because there could be a perception that we're looking at specific areas of detail and struggling, whereas actually it's the holistic view that needs to sustain the future. And that's easily said when you're sat at a board table and you're having to deal on the ground with some very difficult issues. But nonetheless, I think some of the measures that we've identified will put in place some aspects of that, but we still have to deal with that issue around resources. So it's a real plea that perhaps in our forward vision that we can start to accommodate some of that discussion.
Thank you. Anthony.
Thank you. It's a very comprehensive, very good paper, but I'm almost embarrassed to ask any more questions because I think we've probably asked 3 times the length of the paper in questions. I'll try not to cover any of the same areas, so I'll just restrict it to 2 points. Firstly, as Rhiannon said, Northern Ireland seems to be performing slightly better in improvement in inspections, and I wondered if that was linked in any way to perhaps a lower level of food incidents or foodborne disease in Northern Ireland. And the second point was the paper highlights the importance of prioritisation in a world of scarce resources, and whether or not the new systems will actually help specifically support that allocation of resources. So that was me.
And Margaret.
And absolutely, luckily, most of the questions and points have been made. Just a couple of different ones slightly. It's great to hear about the improvements on food hygiene ratings, but especially where some LAs have been facing particular pressures, and well done to Northern Ireland. I don't find the comparison between England and Wales and Northern Ireland that useful, given populations. You know, you've got 2 million Northern Ireland, 3 million Wales, 57 million in England. So are we focusing enough on the vulnerable areas in England? Are we giving them enough scrutiny in the areas that are struggling most, who don't have, you know, separate governments and committees, board members even, to step in? Is that a particular risk? It's about consistency. And very briefly on sampling, is the problem now moving away from lack of labs towards the sampling budgets and insufficient resources, which Mark slightly touched on? Thank you. Fiona, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I just want to, it's a final point I wanted to make about the food, the feed data. We had a really informative visit yesterday to Thompson's with NIGTA and Food Fortress, and really were able to understand the nature of the feed industry based on multiple imports, increasing focus on precision feeding, i.e. specific nutrient delivery, and also concerns about how they manage the risk of that collectively across the industry. And I wanted to acknowledge them and thank you for such an informative visit whilst we're here, but also to say that what it enabled us to understand is the kind of risks in the system that those companies collectively are looking at. And our data doesn't tell us any of that. It just gives us information about whether the organisations are compliant. And I think it would be really helpful in future reports to have some more breakdown of what the risks in the system are and what the non-compliances are for.
Okay, wow. So, I mean, what's absolutely evident is how much the board, A, recognise all the work that's going on, but also recognise the challenges that the sector's experiencing. I think a big thrust of this has been that we've identified lots of the issues, lots of the challenges, but we've got to move towards some proposals for how we're going to make this this different. And I suggest we just simply can't get into that now. We could all speculate, we could have all sorts of ideas, but I think we just need that. We need to ask officials to really take that away and just do some further work on coming forward with some strategic proposals which pick up on many of the issues which have been raised today. That said, there were some very specific questions. So, I mean, well, those are issues about how do we deal with the system as it is, the number of unrated businesses, how can we pick those up, frequency, particular things around sampling, workforce as a big issue, and use of data and integration of data systems. So all of that needs to be part of it, but I think the emphasis needs to be on how do we use that to drive better outcomes, and what are those outcomes and how will we know when we've got there? And that's about linking up into some other areas of our work. I'm struggling to have to, I think what I'm going to do, Nathan and Karen, is ask you to respond to some of the quite specific questions that were asked in that. So there were things like the issue about the data in Wales, and something about whether we do, what we do require on sampling. You know, is there any requirement on sampling, or are we okay with none? That's probably you. Yes, exactly. Okay. Okay. Well, let me hand over to you and see what you say, and then I think we just need to work out how we're going to take this forward, because it would be great if you can answer some of these points, but I very much doubt you're going to pull a rabbit out of a hat and give us a whole new system. So let me hand over, Nathan, back to you, and yeah.
Thank you, Chair. And I've got extensive notes on the questions here. I'll answer a couple of these. I may pass to Karen for some specific answers, and I think Rachel or Beth may want to come in at the end. Just to start by saying that the report does provide assurance to the board that local authorities are out there delivering the official control system. It's indicating where I think problems might be emerging, but I just want to start with making sure that we are assured. A lot of the questions today do point towards the interconnectedness of these issues. And that's one thing that we picked up when we met with industry partners, with local authorities, with professional bodies back in May, is to look at how these issues are connected, what everyone is trying to do to address these, and how we can work together to provide a sustainable solution to the issues. Just picking up on some of the specific points, Chair. On the data comparability between England and Wales, I'd like to reassure you that the data is largely comparable. There may be small differences in the way that the hygiene delivery model or the standards delivery model may be delivered between the two countries, and that will come down to how the local authorities work together or the requirements within the code specific to those countries. But from our perspective, they are largely comparable, and we're comfortable with those differences. Sampling, I'll pass. It's probably better for me to pass to Rick for a more substantive answer when he picks up in his paper. But from our perspective, whilst the code requires local authorities to have a plan, there is no requirement on what those levels look like, and that was picked up in one of the questions. I think where we need to be careful, and where Rick can probably expand here, is a simple requirement to have sampling carried out doesn't necessarily mean that sampling is effective or delivering kind of a useful outcome. So I think Rick is probably better placed to talk about that sampling situation more broadly. But we are working together on how we make sure that there is a benefit to consumers at the end of the day. Some of the other points that were picked up, Chair, if I could cover very quickly. On the question of funding, we are exploring cost recovery as one of the options to address sustainable funding within the system. We're working quite closely with local authority partners on this issue because it is very, very relevant to how they run their services, but also we're speaking with MHCLG to make sure this is consistent with a cross-government approach to how local authorities are funded. And in those conversations with MHCLG, we're also talking about the planning part of that conversation. So I think that was picked up in a question. I think if I can pass to Karen here to pick up something on resourcing issues and also what the delivery model gives us.
Thank you, Nathan. So yes, just to respond in an order, I really welcome the comments about us making steady progress because I think that's really important in the context of workforce. It is going to take a long time to address those issues of workforce, and I think we are chipping away at the issue. If I can start off with just the changes that we are outlining in the food hygiene delivery model, because I think that's important. So with ministerial approval, we are aiming to lay those in Parliament by the end of October. And what that will do, it will introduce the ability to triage, for local authorities to triage businesses based on their risk profile at the point of registration, and therefore triage when they can do those initial official controls. So that will provide some flexibility for local authorities based on the information that they have. It will also introduce the ability for a broader cohort of officers to be used to deploy official activities and official controls, and that includes sampling activities. And it will introduce a broader methods and techniques of official controls that local authority can deploy as well. So they will have a broader range of things that they can employ in those lower risk category premises as well. Coming on to resourcing, I think there is a question about what's the cause, and is it just that local authorities can't compete? I think no, it's a lot more complex than that, and we did deliver some research a couple of years ago which really explored the different challenges. And we're also starting to hear from industry that they are struggling to recruit as well. So we have already had initial conversations with Skills England. I know our colleagues in Wales are exploring avenues in Wales as well. And we've been talking to DEFRA about part of their strategy as well, and whether skills can be profiled within that. So I think we are starting to make those connections across industry and across professional bodies and across government as well. Mark, to come on specifically to your question about the resourcing tool, what we've provided to local authorities is a tool that they can use to really understand what resource they need to deliver the full range of requirements in the Code of Practice. And within that, we've given them very detailed guidance about how they should collect information, a time and motion study about how long it takes officers to do specific activities. I think just to pick up on the questions about registration and Tim, to your question on finances as well, as Nathan outlined, this is a holistic approach. So one of the things that we find as we've been exploring the resourcing issue is that it kind of has a reach right into the system. So we brought a paper to the board in March to ask permission to further explore cost recovery, and after a period of internal reprioritisation, we are standing up that programme as we speak. So my team met yesterday to really kickstart that work. And our colleagues in Wales have already started a piece of work to look at issues around registration as well, and they're working really closely with local authorities in Wales to do that. So as part of this longer term thinking about what we need to do to adapt the regulatory system, we are considering how we might broaden that across England and Northern Ireland to understand the different needs and different situations in each country. As has been picked up on, Northern Ireland does have a different resourcing profile. There are a couple of reasons behind that, but again, we are looking to what lessons we can learn from our colleagues in Northern Ireland.
Great, thank you very much. I mean, good to hear all of that work going on, particularly the consultation with stakeholders, because we do need to do this sort of jointly, because we might have a sort of high-level view of what we'd like to see happen, but there's a whole lot of harsh realities on the ground that we really need to be cognizant of, and ensuring we build a system that will actually work in practice, not just one that looks beautiful on paper. Katie, did you want to come in, or shall I go to Beth and Rachel to some? Yep. Okay. We need to be pretty quick, so let's be careful not to duplicate. Yep.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to welcome the clarity from the board, really on kind of where you see the fundamentals for the regulatory reform thinking that Karen's mentioned is going on. We absolutely kind of, we don't just want it, but we need that to be with the involvement of our local authority colleagues. And we started having a series of events and conversations with them to do that. I mean, I think from just reflecting on the conversation here, we have to look at what are the things that are going to make sure we've got sustainable improvements within the system. And I think for me, that's ensuring really that the code and the performance management framework that we've got in place are aligned with the desire that we know our local authority colleagues have to put their scarce resource where the risk exists in the system. And I'm not sure at the moment we've completely got those things joined up. And then also this kind of fundamental question around skills and capability, and the work that Karen's mentioned with DEFRA and Skills England, we think are a way of raising the profile and importance of that as the thinking is going on under the food strategy about the skills that are needed, both by industry but also within local authorities. Thank you.
I won't duplicate that, but just a final point from me. I think it's now 3 or 4 years I've been coming to the board and saying there is a big backlog, it's getting slightly better, but it's still a big problem. The team have just gone through a whole range of work that we've got underway to try and make this system more effective and more sustainable financially and in resourcing terms. But we've also been coming saying we haven't seen a drop in business compliance. And we do need to keep asking ourselves the question, actually, is this the best way of assuring that businesses are complying? It's a system that was designed quite some time ago. So in the longer term, we absolutely have to continue that reform thinking. We started with national level regulation. The point Fiona makes about resourcing is a really important one. We can't do all the reform at the same time. But I just want to not lose sight of that in the board. This is a multi-track set of reforms.
Thanks, Katie. I agree with that, but I think partly because, and I remember we had a paper which set out that broad thing with all the different pillars of the strategy some while ago, but I think it might be timely for us to revisit that in the light of where we are now, and also again, you know, we've got quite a different composition of the board, so it will be a useful reminder, if nothing else. But some things will have changed, and I think perhaps what's maybe not changed for me, but become much more pressing is that I don't think we can carry on the way we are doing this. We need to do something different for exactly the reasons you say, and this whole point about us becoming more focused on matching the resources to the risk and not matching the resources to a code that was set up a very long time ago, and that's you know, that does imply that change is needed, and change is always challenging at any time, but especially when resources are tight, which comes back to the point that I think Steve made. These things are all interconnected, and that's why I think it would be really helpful for the board to have a strategic paper which doesn't have, you know, so much of the issues, but has more of the potential solutions and the pros and cons, the knock-on consequences, so a genuinely strategic and you know, in some places maybe quite challenging paper, because I think unless we expose what the possibilities are and what are the risks that those brings, we're not going to make forward progress. But that's clearly something that you need to work through with local authorities. I don't want to be in a position where the board is, you know, having bright ideas when we're not understanding what the reality is on the ground. So if I could ask, we can maybe think about the timing of that after this meeting, but I think that's a priority. I certainly don't want it to wait for next year's annual update before we make progress on this. Before I close this item, I do also want to say two positive things. One, you know, yes, well done. Thank you, local authorities, for battling on and continuing to do what you do, which is incredibly important. And secondly, we haven't talked about it at all in the discussion, but I am really pleased to see that the new food standards delivery model is now in place in the vast majority of places in England. I really look forward to making progress on that in Wales too. I know, again, that has been no small task. There's been challenges as ever with the IT systems, but that is mostly now in place, and I think we just should just take a moment to celebrate some of the successes on this journey, which you know, is certainly going to have a few more challenges yet to go. So I think the action from there is a strategy paper. Is there anything else that people specifically want to pick up on that we need to take forward out of this item? No? Okay. So thank you very much indeed to Nathan, to Karen, Beth and Rachel, who are overseeing this work, and really to everybody in your team who's working on this. Thank you. So we've got one more substantive item before we have a short break, and this is our annual science update. So delighted to welcome Rick Mumford to the table, who's the FSA's Deputy CSA, and who will really be stepping up in the interregnum until we appoint Robin's successor. I'm very conscious that this is a really broad-ranging paper. Rick, thank you for that. I think it is a really good to bring to the board's attention the breadth of the science work that goes on in the agency and some of the illustrations of the sort of tangible components of that. So thank you very much. We've already had conversations in the local authority paper about things which touch on our science, particularly in relation to sampling. So I think we will want to pick those items up further in the discussion. But before we get on to that, do you want to say a few sort of opening remarks just to summarise some of the points in the paper, Rick?
Thank you, Susan. So I'm very pleased to be presenting the annual science update. It's in two key parts. First of all, there is a retrospective looking back over the last year since the last one presented in September 2024, and focusing on the sort of three key functions that we provide within science, and that is supporting risk analysis and market authorizations, looking at our research and evidence portfolio, and then also science infrastructure. And again, I can specifically pick up on how that then plays into things like national capabilities and sampling, etc. But then also the other piece, and a piece that we've probably put more into this year because of the spending review, is that forward look and those sort of 4 priority areas that we highlight. I'm pleased to see the board has already picked up on the fact that we're going to be doing more work looking forward on foodborne disease and understanding foodborne disease. I think the board will also be pleased to know that surveillance in the whole is also going to be part of a key priority for us. We're also going to look at how we can continue building on things like the sandbox and other initiatives to support regulatory science innovation. And finally, and last but not least, also looking at how we can continue to provide that evidence to support the work we do as a regulator and also across the food system. Susan, would you like me to just say a few things straight off about sampling, seeing as I was set up ready to talk about that in the last meeting?
Yes, but just before you do that, I'm just going to ask Robin if he has any comments on the sort of generality of this paper or things that he thinks the board should particularly focus their attention on.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, so I mean, I'm delighted by the paper. I think it shows not only a very good set of progress over the last year, but the future look, as Rick says, I think is very promising. I guess the key things I would highlight, I think what comes out very strongly is the partnership working. So things like the food safety network, which I think is very influential, and particularly, although it's not very prominent in the paper, some of the work with industry around things like diagnostics. We talked earlier today about changing face of sort of diagnostic for foodborne disease, and I think it's really important for us both to be it's not for us to devise those tests, but it is for industry, and it's important for us to be stimulating that, but also to be aware of what's happening, because that changes, a much more sensitive test, for example, will change our reporting, and we need to be aware of that in advance. So that's one area, I think. And then the other thing that I think has been, I'm really delighted to see in here, is the work we've been doing right across government and broader around methods to support risk assessment, and particularly the one I'd call out in here is the so-called NAMs, the new analytical methods, or non-animal-based methods. I mean, it's sort of, again, a very small paragraph here, but that belies a huge amount of work that has been happening within CERD. Amy and others who've been leading on that. It is very challenging to get broad agreement in this area, but it's absolutely critical. I think I'm delighted we've been playing a big role in that, and it will be hugely beneficial, not only in terms of moving the methods forwards, but also in terms of our accuracy of our risk assessments going forward. I guess those are the two that I would particularly highlight. Thanks.
Thank you. So Rick, back to you on, I guess, sampling and the foodborne disease as well.
So to characterize the sampling piece, I'll probably do that in 3 ways. So first of all, there's the piece around that we've just been talking about in terms of the reduction in the number of samples. And that is something, as Nathan has said, that we will be working on. We are trying to look again at our sampling portfolio across the whole of the FSA. We probably have 14 or 15 different areas where we're working in sampling projects at the moment, and how we sort of better coordinate those and better make sure that we, in a resource-constricted area, that we make maximum use of that. So we will definitely continue to work with Nathan and his team to see how we can do more in that space to maybe support and facilitate local authority sampling. The second piece I would say is, though, that we do actually do a significant piece on surveillance sampling already, around £1 million a year spent on that across different programs. That's the retail surveillance survey, that's import surveillance, and also through Nathan's team doing some work on official control, so supporting local authorities to actually take official control samples in specific areas. I think that is very much the way forward in terms of risk-based, intelligence-based targeting. And I think this is the thing to the question about how many samples is enough. Well, actually, if you're very good at your targeting and your intelligence is very good, you do actually hit. You can actually find more things. However, I will defer to Mark's point about that general piece about surveillance as well, and how you then look for those unknown unknowns that might be in the system. So again, that is something that still needs to be addressed by a more targeted approach. The final thing that I would say on it, and I think this would pick up on Margaret's point, is as well as sampling, we also have testing. So it's sampling and testing. And I think one of the things that we have very much focused on is the ability, if you take those samples, are there actually laboratories with the right capabilities and skills to actually, and the methods to actually do that testing? And I think that is an area where we have invested heavily and where we continue to invest and support the official control labs in doing their valuable work.
Okay, let's just pause there, and if there are any further questions on sampling. I think, Rick, you mentioned that we already do quite a lot of sampling and that there is a plan, and you know, that's sort of somewhat reassuring. I think it would be quite helpful to see some of that written down as to, you know, kind of what's the strategy over sampling, where do we think there might be gaps and so on. So I think if we could ask you just to provide that to the board, that would be helpful. Anything anybody else wanted to pick up on, Mark, on sampling?
Yeah, just one point which occurred to me as Rick was speaking, if I may, which was the difference between sampling and testing. Because one of the issues I think which Nathan's report highlighted is that the staffing issues around taking the sampling is one reason why there are a reduced number of samples. But actually there are samples taken which are submitted to laboratories for testing for a purpose. But if we're looking at wider surveillance, those same samples may also generate useful data and information were they to be tested for other things which might occur in that particular kind of food type or whatever. And I just wondered whether there's any scope for us to look at making better use of the samples that are taken.
That's a good point, and one that could get picked up in a strategic paper. Okay, so Rick, could we ask you just to tell us a little bit more about the foodborne disease work that we're doing? I mean, it is one of your priority areas, but I think it would be reassuring, given the breaches we've seen in the thresholds. It would be helpful to hear a little bit more about what we're doing to address that.
Yeah, so as we highlighted, one of the things that, you know, based on things like the exceedance of the thresholds, but also just other information, we're sort of reprioritizing again on some of the on foodborne disease and that better understanding of foodborne disease. We're trying to, there are the immediate issues as well, and I think we've touched on some of the things that are ongoing at the moment. So this isn't all about just what we're going to do across spending review. There's a lot of stuff in train already. So for example, we are, we've talked about EFIG and the sort of the work they're doing. There's been some work on expert elicitation, trying to identify what some of the issues are that we should be focusing on. What are some of the questions that we need to be answering? There's also a lot of work looking at data, and I think people have touched on some of those issues before. Is it, you know, what is actually driving some of these increases? And one of the things there, I think it was Frank who raised it earlier about the idea of, you know, where is some of this coming from? Is it necessarily within the UK system, or is it through travel? Is it through imports? Those sorts of things, and we're trying to understand that. So there's a whole range of different things going on there. We're also trying to continue working on some of the pieces that ongoing pieces of work like IID3, which is there to sort of understand. First of all, it's been out there generating a lot of data, looking at what are the main pathogens, what is making people sick. The evidence of that is starting to come in. We're starting to get all that data now, and now how we analyze that and how we build that into things like foodborne disease estimates will be really important. And then I suppose the other thing, just to be brief, is as well thinking forward to how we do things like surveillance for foodborne pathogens in the future, and looking at new methodologies, surveillance, better use of whole genome sequencing. How can we use that to support incidents? How we can use alternative methods such as on-site diagnostics, maybe in locations such as ports or even abattoirs, or then how we can also do things like broader population surveillance through things like wastewater testing. We know that has a lot of power. Can we use that? And to that point, I think it actually alludes to Mark's point earlier about this concept of sample once, test for many. The idea there that you can then sort of work with others to piggyback on other testing that is already done. So, you know, in a One Health context, does government do more surveillance in the environment, for example, and then use that for foodborne pathogens, plant health pathogens, animal pathogens, etc. So create a much more joined up system. Again, sharing the cost of the front end surveillance, but then using that evidence in different public health, animal health, plant health scenarios.
Thank you. Tim.
Yeah, just thank Rick for this presentation there, and just giving us more information, I think, around where our kind of surveillance and intelligence can deliver, hopefully, benefits for us. Because one of the things we have talked about is resources and logistics, and if you excuse the phrase, but doing things longhand is very resource intensive. And what I haven't got a sense of is if we are looking for kind of pattern recognition and trying to overlay patterns of where there are incidences, or even where there's local authority performance issues, or whether there's a provenance around food-borne incidents, as Frank had raised earlier, are we using AI in any of that? And have we the intention to do that? Because clearly we can't carry on necessarily as we are doing things, as I say, longhand. And any way we can do to expedite and use that in a sensible but applied way that allows us to be more effective has probably got to be the way forward.
Sorry? Well, I was going to just see if there were any more questions, I guess, on that general. I was going to ask you to say a little bit more about the sort of data integration and the sort of, the scientific component of our data integration work. So maybe we could ask Julie to pick up on those two topics, and then I'll open up for anything else.
Thank you. So you mentioned my key word, which was AI, Tim. So I feel the need to respond, but also thank you for Susan expanding it out beyond AI and its wider data opportunities. So overall, the short answer is yes, we are thinking about those things. We have a number of ideas, and I think the challenge for us is around prioritization. Which ones should we go for first, given we will be resource constrained? We are always very keen, and I think we've got a number of examples here where that's an area where we do wish to work with others. There are others who've got deeper pockets than us to acquire all of the technology. So we're not shy in forming those sorts of relationships, which we do. Also, it's not just about the technology and whizzy things that can come up with all of these sorts of answers. And I think maybe we touched on some of this at our visit to Queen's yesterday. Yes, all that technology is there, it's all absolutely critical, but equally are things like the data ownership, data sharing agreements, legal exploitation of data, the governance of it, all of that sort of end of it is sometimes as much of a challenge as is the sort of the front end with the data scientists. So we need to do that. I think we're getting more experience of understanding that and working with others and working with those who are also grappling with the same thing, whether it's sort of across research institutions or it's across wider government. So I think the profile and the need, the recognition that that is critical. Otherwise, all that data will sit in its silos. So we're putting a lot of effort into that. We have been around a number of these areas before. The PathSafe work, a lot of that was about building the technology, and a lot of that technology was key to its sustainability, so it can be providing ongoing services. Also, the discussions we were having this morning about local authorities around whether we can do more with surveillance. We do a lot of work, international surveillance. We could turn that on ourselves and use the same tools internally to see what's going on if we would wish to do that. And we have previously done a lot of work around understanding the risk at a more of a micro level at some of the postcode level. So there's a lot that we know we can do, but I think a lot of it is around working out what the priorities are and then ensuring others will take these things forward and get value from them. So just by way of update, I hope that covers a number of the areas where we're looking. Thanks.
Thanks, Julie. And yeah, really grateful for all the work that's going on in this. I do think FSA is providing a bit of leadership in this area about building the sort of data infrastructure around the food system. So thank you for that. Any more questions on this report from anyone else? Anthony, and then I'll come to Mark.
I'm just conscious over the last number of weeks we've heard in the news and other outlets the use of AI for the development of new generation of antibiotics and stuff like that. So I'm wondering, it's an excellent paper, but have we considered, or are we considering the use of AI to actually advance the science elements of what we're doing and how we do it, particularly in the areas of, you know, improved data analysis, certainly, but also in the innovation of nutrition and health systems?
So, yes, our main area of interest to date in the sort of like the scientific world has been in the development of NAMs. So that's been an area where we've been actively involved in tracking that, and we see that as key to those new NAMs. More generally around the new sort of like the novel foods, those sorts of areas, and also some of the nutrition conversations. Much of them, I think, we're thinking we're not necessarily the lead in those areas. So it's sort of either for industry or other researchers to lead at the moment. So we're not prioritising those areas. But we're sort of casting the net quite widely as to ideas and taking them on board.
Mark.
Thanks, Susan. I just had a couple of comments, if I may, in relation to the bit of your report, Rick, which is about building and sustaining science capabilities. The first thing I wanted to do is to kind of emphasise, if I may, you've got a bit in here about official laboratory support adding to our capacity, but you've mentioned that it sustains capacity, and I don't want to lose sight of that. I think that's a really important part of what we're doing. It's all very well and good adding to our capacity and capability, but that's not helpful if we lose the stuff that we've already got. So not a question, just a reflection. You also mentioned in here funding to support the public analyst training programme, which reminded me that I had been approached by a partner organisation, actually at the Westminster briefing for the launch of the annual report, around that training programme, with some questions around how suitable that qualification is going into the future. You've highlighted in here that it takes 5 to 6 years to complete. It's a postgraduate qualification, as you well know, I know, Rick. So by the time someone qualifies as a public analyst, they're potentially 9 years postgraduate, which is a long time. And there were questions being raised about whether there's any kind of adjustments that can be made, recognising the limited number of public analysts and the age profile of that profession, to allow some performance of their duties at a kind of staged level of qualification. So it's not an all or nothing qualification. It's you get to a certain point and you can do certain things in much the same way as we've done with local authorities, actually, where we've adjusted the codes of practice to allow people at different stages of qualifications to undertake different functionality. At the moment, you can't do anything as a public analyst until you've got the full qualification, and that takes a long time. Somebody starting that now is not likely to be qualified before many of the current public analysts have retired. And I do think that represents a risk to us. I was also at Queen's University.
Just on that point, I mean, great points, and all I hope well taken. We probably should remind people of your sort of day job in the public analyst service. Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I should have done that at the start. You're absolutely right, Susan. Yes, I should just remind people that one of my services is a public analyst laboratory, which is why I know what I'm talking about in this space, obviously. I was at Queen's University yesterday and we were shown around some of the facilities that they had there. They were talking about method development as one of their activities that they undertake there. And it struck me at that point that we have a current system with official control laboratories and national reference laboratories, which linked in around some of that method development stuff. But we don't currently involve some of those universities in that kind of work. And I just wonder whether our current structure, which has been in place for a long time, is fit for purpose, or whether we need to look at that kind of wider availability of the expertise that might be that we might then enable us to develop new methods and be quite agile in developing new things as their need becomes apparent. So again, just a kind of look to the future. And my last comment, if I may, we touched on local government reorganisation in the local authority paper, but just to remind colleagues, 3 of the 4 public analyst laboratories in England are owned by local authorities who are subject to local government review in the next 3 to 4 years, some of which may not exist, the local authority may not exist after that review. That obviously presents a risk for us as a food standards agency, so just wanted to put it on our radar firmly.
Thank you. Some, as I say, really good points there for us to be aware of. Rick, do you want to respond?
Yes, some really quick ones. And actually going back to Anthony's point and just adding on the AI to give some other examples, we're looking at AI in terms of bioinformatics. And again, you know, can we do some of that rather than having very, very skilled bioinformaticians? Can you get AI to help and support that process? So because we all know that whole genome sequencing, for example, is really key to what we do. To Mark's point, yes, building a sustained capability, absolutely. It's got to be the BAU as well as the new stuff, so we accept that. MKMA, absolutely happy to listen to any options that might be there that people could suggest. I mean, certainly when we started this looking at the labs program, and I'm now talking 7 years ago when I came in, we started looking at things. Everyone was saying the MKMA is a really good thing and the support and the PAs. However, that does not mean that we shouldn't consider how we evolve it and whether there are ways of doing that. Should just say that in the interim, we are stepping in to support the Royal Society of Chemistry and maintaining that qualification, because I think even though it can evolve, we don't need it to disappear now, because I think it would be very challenging. On that method development piece as well, I think it's a very good point, and absolutely one of the things, and one of the conversations we've been having with DEFRA, because we do a lot of our food authenticity methods work with DEFRA as a sort of virtual joint program. We have been talking about the existing things we have, the Food Authenticity Network, the Authenticity Methods Working Group, those things that we do collectively, but also how we can broaden it out, because we are conscious that actually it's the same faces, the same names, and actually bringing new participants into that space would be very helpful, and again, how we engage with the universities. I would say actually, Queen's is actually part of that existing mechanism, but it's some of the others we've brought in, and there's a piece of work that we've recently done on honey authenticity, which we did with Cranfield University, for example, who I wouldn't say are one of the traditional players in the food authenticity space, but are doing a really good piece of work. So yes, we are very much open to a big funnel of lots of academics coming in and then channel it down, but it's how we then get those academic research-driven methods into methods that can be deployed, and from a working method to deployment, I would say is often challenging and maybe take twice as long as the first bit of the technology readiness level.
Brian.
Thank you, and thank you for the paper. I read it with great interest, and I think I've only been on the board 2 years, but this annual report is evolving quickly into something really tractable for all of us with different backgrounds and perspectives, so thank you. Just a couple of points to add to the others. The big one, picking up on partnerships, actually, with the sort of SPS coming down the track, however that may unfold, I suppose any thoughts you've got on our international collaborations and partnerships, and if there are any gaps where we are putting any focus in anticipation. The second was on allergens. So there isn't anything in the paper about allergens, and we've done work at board about thresholds, but are we going to cycle back to that? And if so, when might we? Because obviously sits in the science portfolio, and a bit of discussion at WFAC last week was around, you know, food manufacturers raising this and seeking guidance, I suppose, and what our position might be in the future. And then finally, a small point, but I think a really interesting one. So it mentions in the paper about the consumer awareness of precision breeding being really quite low, and whether we feel that's part of our job is to raise that awareness. Are we doing anything in that space as the policy and the guidance develops? Thank you.
Great, thank you. Rin, can I just clarify, when you talked about doing more on allergens, was there something particular in the science space? I mean, clearly there's a huge amount more to do on allergens in the policy space, but I was wondering what it was that WFAC were keen to see on the coming out of our science.
No, not in the science space. It was more just general guidance, threshold work.
Rick, some very specific questions there for you, and I'm going to ask you to keep it quite brief, please.
No, some very good points. And I think in terms of that SBS space, I would say the one thing that we've sort of kept on the back burner, but one thing we would very much like to consider is how we re-engage with EFSA going forward and some of the more European organisations around food safety and food science. I think that's been the thing. We've maintained some really good relationships across, you know, transcontinental, you know, Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, Canada, but actually EFSA is one which I think we would like to rebuild, and I think that could be very powerful. Allergens, I think you've answered the question on what the challenge is there, but just to say methods is still on the agenda, is because we did some report on some of the gaps, and we've also done some work on deploying methodologies into official controls, and we want to make sure that we still have that capability, because we know allergens is still an issue. In terms of testing. That consumer awareness, yeah, I think it's a very good point about how we do that. I mean, I think the evidence coming through from consumer insight is really valuable, but it is the so what, isn't it? Is about what do you do about the fact that people are unaware, and, you know, are there other organisations we can work with to help promote that as well, rather than it just being down to the FSA. So maybe it's some of the other, you know, some of the other entities that are out there that we could use. Science Media Centre, for example.
Thank you very much, Rick. I mean, we could talk about science forever, but I'm going to wrap it up there unless there's anything really pressing. I guess I absolutely agree with Rian. I think the science reporting that we're getting has really stepped up. It's much clearer, and I think that's actually indicative of much more focus within the FSA on what we're doing in our science and what it's all about. A clearer emphasis on our core areas of business, so things like foodborne disease, on surveillance, including things like allergens. We will absolutely need to have a hard think about relationships with EFSA and relationships with the European science community, again, in the light of the SPS agreement. There'll also be an opportunity, I think, for us to have a sort of fresh pair of eyes on our science when the new chief scientist is appointed. So I think this is a great platform to be taking forward, and really look forward to seeing how it will develop over the coming year, because I think there are some genuine opportunities. So thank you very much indeed to you, to Julie, and to everybody in CERD. We haven't really talked a great deal about the social science component as well, but of course that's an important part of what we do. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we're running a little bit behind ourselves. It's 11:10 now, but we will break for coffee, and everybody should stretch their legs. If I can ask that we come back again extremely promptly, just before 11:30, so we can make a very prompt start at 11:30. Thank you very much. So welcome back, everybody, to the second half of today's board meeting, and I'm really pleased to welcome to the table Kevin Marr, who's head of the animal welfare contracts, who's going to introduce this next paper, which is our annual animal welfare update. This is a topic that I know many board members, including myself, feel quite strongly about. And it's always very tempting to want to do more. I do want to point out that the FSA's responsibilities in this area are relatively limited and very precisely defined. We deliver the animal welfare controls in England and Wales through a service delivery agreement with DEFRA and the Welsh Government, and they are the people who own the animal welfare policies for animals at slaughter. And obviously a separate arrangement is in place here in Northern Ireland through DERA. That makes for a slightly complicated landscape, because the enforcement of animal welfare standards is distributed across a number of different players. In approved slaughterhouse premises, it is the responsibility of the FSA. But for issues related to animal transport or the farm of origin, the FSA gathers information and makes a referral to the local authority or to APHA for further investigation and enforcement. And so I think it is important to remember that when we look at some of the data that's in the report that Kev has presented to us today. But having given that little background tutorial, I'm going to hand over to you just to summarise some of the key points in this paper. Thank you.
And thanks, Susan, for that introduction and explanation, which is useful. And good morning, everybody. Just to highlight then some of the areas of the report, and firstly the data. The data, again, for England and Wales, it does show us that throughput has slightly increased from the 23-24 reporting year. We've still got over 1 billion animals entering the food chain, which was also a 2.6% increase on the previous reporting period. An overwhelming majority of those animals are processed in full compliance with animal welfare legislation at 99.99%. The remainder are processed with non-compliances recorded. Some of these were animals that were affected by the breaches at the slaughterhouse. This relates to 33,000 animals, which is down from 44,000 on the previous year, a reduction of 23%. And we're at a 5-year low of the amount of animals that have been impacted by some of the breaches. Out of that 33,000, I'd also point out that that figure includes a single incident during last year, where that one incident related to 28,000 birds where slaughter was delayed due to a breakdown of food and water was not provided. So that's a significant portion of that 33,000. There are 3 areas of the data. For the slaughterhouse incidents, we have seen an increase of 147 incidents on the previous year. And we've got 509 incidents that we've recorded. Out of those, 251 were at level 3 with a potential for welfare to be impacted, and 258, the remainder, being at level 4 where there was imminent or actual welfare risks or welfare breaches recorded. Out of those, again, 42 of the incidents related to one single slaughterhouse, which has now had the approval removed. We did see a significant increase in breaches around the movement of animals that related to the failure of poultry equipment and also cattle being roughly handled at slaughterhouses. And we've also seen an increase in breaches identified with standard operating procedures that the food businesses have to have in place, and also breaches against the CCTV regulations. Both types of these breaches don't necessarily impact the animals themselves directly, but they do contribute to the overall figure that we've got of non-compliance. Farm cases, again, have increased by 43%, and transport cases also by 21%. We have had a new approach in identifying the trappings of poultry, which has seen that 29% of the farm and transport cases that have been referred are for this. And that new approach is where we've got our OVs making more detailed checks of poultry that are transported in crates and modules, and that's seen a significant increase in the year. Other areas of the paper to highlight are the activities that we've undertaken. We manage the Animal Welfare Action Plan on behalf of DEFRA and Welsh Government, and it includes leading the steering group, which comprises of a number of other government departments and stakeholder membership. A focus of this work to highlight is the establishment of the Animal Welfare Referral Working Group. This has a focus to an objective to improve the information that's supplied to all our co-regulators to support their investigations and enforcement approaches to repeat or serial offenders or significant offences that relate to have been committed to the farm of origin or the transporter or the haulier. It has been recognised that the responses to the information that's been shared within this group has not led to improved outcomes yet, and the FSA's Animal Welfare Team has proposed that the group is refreshed and transferred to the DEFRA Animal Welfare Policy Team to influence a greater focus from AFA and local authorities towards those referrals. In addition to the action plan, there's been significant action in response to some covert filming at one slaughterhouse and the subsequent support to the investigations and the enforcement. We were already taking action when this footage came to light. The outcome of this resulted in the approval to operate as a slaughterhouse being removed in May, which is slightly outside of the reporting period, but it is relevant to the report. Subsequent to that, an internal audit provided assurance that all processes had been followed, that the FSA's policy to remove the approval was robust. However, some minor recommendations were identified and had been delivered. And following that incident, we completed an analysis to provide assurances that proportionate action was being taken were repeat breaches and identified repeat breaches were identified at other slaughterhouses. And finally, just on the forward look, the FSA's animal welfare team will continue the monitoring, surveillance and proportionate action to oversee welfare of animals at slaughter. In the coming months and year, we will complete and publish the Slaughter Sector Survey 2026, the biannual survey. We will follow up with AFA and local authorities with the referrals that we make to gain feedback and gain some improvement to results. And we'll continue our ongoing successful collaboration with our counterparts in DEFRA and Welsh Government to deliver the welfare policies and the associated controls. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kev, and thanks for all the work that's gone on over this. It's very helpful, and thank you for updating the board on the actions that were taken at the abattoir that we discussed at the last board meeting. I'm pleased about the work that's gone on there, and also to thank those people who were involved in the review of those processes. It was reassuring to see that our processes were being followed. So that's that's a good thing. The thing I suppose that really did concern me in reading this report is the increase in breaches identified at slaughter, whether those are on farm or in transport. And I just wonder whether you've got any suggestions about how we can improve that sort of feedback loop. That we pass the information on, but how can we ensure we're working together with DEFRA and AFA and the other people to reduce those numbers? I know it's a topic that's come up in previous years when we've discussed this, but if we're seeing an increase in the number of incidents, then it suggests that we're not getting that feedback loop working well enough. We are not. Everybody is not getting that loop working. So, any other comments from board members, and then I'll ask you. We'll gather them all up and come back to you at the end. So, Tim's in first.
Thank you very much. And of course, I have to declare an interest as the livestock producer in this. So, let's get that out of the way first. But actually, that also brings a benefit in having conversations with Kevin to understand exactly what's happening on the ground. And I think. I just want to sort of give some background to when we look at these figures to realise that they are stratified between technical incidents, which are important for us to understand what's happening in the broader scope of welfare at these plants, as well as actual incidents where there is actually poor handling or cruelty towards animals, which is totally unacceptable. And indeed, that has to be reported. And I think at a public level, the public would be rightly concerned around those as much as the technical side. So I think it's just important to stress that when I was going through with Kevin, because I was rightly concerned at the level of instances, both those through the farm side and the transport, but also within plants, and also to ask the question, was there actually a pattern here that we as a regulator rightly need to be concerned about at a high level of significance? I think the benefit of those discussions, I don't think there does appear to be that doesn't diminish the need for us to be constantly vigilant. And I'm also much more gratified to understand that there aren't endemic cruelty issues being experienced on the ground by the staff that are working in the plants. But I do believe that it's a good measure to look at the technical compliances as well as the actual incidences of animal handling to get a measure of the compliance within those plants and their adherence to regulation. So I think that sort of backdrop reassured me quite a lot. But I would like to see more how we can develop more adequate reporting around incidences. And going back to a comment when I was sort of raised the AI comment earlier, where we can start to pick up where there are patterns, because often these are not just single instances, they recur. And what I don't want us to do is use inappropriately resources where there are, if you like, anomaly instances versus those that actually are a significant trend. So I'll just leave it there.
So, Tim, do I take from that that you're suggesting we need to sort of increase the granularity of the reporting and at least divide it up between what you might call technical breaches versus breaches which directly affect the welfare of animals? Maybe Kev, you could comment on whether that might be realistic. And then I think we've already in a way covered the AI issue, and I think Julie's team are on the case in terms of trying to do that pattern identification. I think I had Margaret, Frank, and then Fiona.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, James, and all the lawyers working on these things in the abattoirs, and also to all the staff, because it is a really tough environment working there, and we appreciate that. My concern is repeat breaches, and how big a problem is that? And secondly, what's the position in the extreme when somebody breaches, the rules, and then they just close down and open again under another name?
Frank?
Yeah, thank you. So, I was very pleased to see the low level of detection of breaches, but I suppose whenever I see something like that, I wonder, what are we not seeing, and how hard are we looking? And I did find some comfort, obviously, in the audits that are being carried out, because that gave some assurance that we're not missing a lot of things. But that brought me to the question of the CCTV and the fact that it's, as I understand it, mandated in Wales but not elsewhere. Do other slaughterhouses use CCTV? And where they are in use, how are they used? I'm sorry, this is my ignorance, but are they used as a kind of record if somebody needs to go and look at something to see if something has gone wrong, and particularly on the animal cruelty side? Or is somebody continually monitoring them to actually see if there are any breaches going on? And have they actually, since they've been introduced legally in Wales, have they actually identified any breaches or particularly issues of cruelty? Thank you.
Done Margaret, Frank, Fiona.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you. It's a really clear paper. I wanted to pick up on Tim's question about whether the non-compliances are causing harm or process elements, but also to dig into that slightly deeper and ask whether they're typically in single areas, I mean, you've broken it down by layerage and movement and stunning and bleeding, or whether people are breaching across multiple points of that process. And that then feeds into the repeat thing. So I think having a bit more granularity of data would help. But if there are multiple breaches, my assumption is that that indicates, that there's an overall poor performance of that operator. And is it useful to have more granularity there, or is that something you can report on as an overarching assessment?
Okay, thank you very much. So lots of questions there around. Oh, sorry, Mark.
Thank you, Susan. I just wanted to pick up, if I may, on some of the comments in here in relation to local authorities. Because the report, I think, is really, really useful and positive, but the local authority bit doesn't quite gel with what I understand to be the case in the local authority space. Firstly, I noticed that local authorities aren't represented in relation to the steering group, but are in relation to the referrals group, and I just wondered why, and I haven't quite got my mind around what the terms of reference for the steering group is, but the steering group does refer to the referrals groups. Just wondering why local authorities are not engaged at that level. There is also a comment in here about local authorities not providing feedback to referrals when they receive them. And I have to say that doesn't surprise me at all. Local authority work in this space. Firstly, local authorities have a power to enforce animal welfare legislation, but no duty. So it's their choice as to whether they enforce this role or not. The information that they'll receive from our staff and colleagues in the slaughterhouses is vitally important to them, both in terms of animal welfare, but also if there is a welfare issue, there may well also be a disease control issue, and that's the space where local authorities have a duty to enforce. So they may not action a welfare breach as a welfare breach prosecution, but that information is vitally important. The people who do this work are often our trading standards colleagues, and they're often the same people that deal with our food controls, and therefore, as we've heard earlier this morning, they're often not that well resourced. To require feedback for every referral will be resource intensive on them, and there needs to be a really known and clear benefit to doing that, and I'm just interested to know what that benefit would be.
Fiona?
Sorry, I forgot to ask the other question. It's to do with the feedback onto transport and farm, and whether we are including in the process the assurance agencies. We've talked in the past about Red Tractor, but also the retailers have got quite distinct supply chains. Many of them, where they're doing well, want to put animal welfare up front and centre of what they're giving the consumer. But equally, if their supply chains aren't performing and animal welfare is an issue in the places that they're buying from, then they can help to step in as well. And so I just think there are other players that can come in that we can engage with, which goes slightly outside the government network.
Thank you, everybody. If I could add one more point, Kev, you can probably guess what it's going to be. It's about the demonstration of life protocol and non-stun slaughter. So concerned to see another year-on-year increase in the number of sheep in particular that are killed by non-stun methods. That is, of course, legal, but I hope it would be good to hear what we're continuing to do to promote the demonstration of life protocol. I also just wanted to bring to the board's attention the note in item 8, which is that DEFRA have done a recent consultation and have committed to considering the potential for role of method of production labelling reform as part of the UK government's development of an overarching approach to animal welfare. I think this is relevant to us as a board because in our consumer surveys, it's very, very clear that people are highly concerned about animal welfare. I think it was about a third of people said they were highly concerned, and almost everybody says they're somewhat concerned. So it would be good to hear anything in particular that we're doing in that area. With that not insignificant list, but I think they group together reasonably well, maybe I can just ask you to come back on some of those points.
Yes, of course. On your first point, which links across some of the other observations around about the feedback loop, we have established case conferences with the welfare referrals group. My team are now producing a monthly exceptions report to focus them onto significant breaches or repeat offenders. And we're trying to focus that and pass that to DEFRA because they might have more teeth with AFA to get some traction and get some results. I was going to come back with the issue of local authority resources that's already been discussed earlier this morning that Mark's touched on, and yes, we do come up against that with certain local authorities and the way that they're set up. Yes, their animal health officers will be part of the trade standards team, which is already stretched, and there are geographical differences across the district and the county councils as well. Relating to the governance around the steering group and the referrals group, we do have AFA at the steering group. All of the referrals are made by the OVs. The instructions are that they go direct to AFA to be triaged, and then AFA then onward cascade into the local authorities after they've been triaged. There is an exception to that. If there is a significant breach that the OV identifies at the slaughterhouse, they can go direct to the local authority, which does happen on the most rarer occasions, but significantly. So we have got AFA cascading to the local authorities. The local authorities are represented. We can't have 300 plus at a working group, so we have got regional representatives, and the regional representatives are the ones that probably have got the biggest geographical portion of it, depending on where they're made up and the different areas of England and Wales. And we get better results from some areas than others, as you can, and we're trying to bring out the best practices and promote the ones who are doing it best, and trying to improve that across the board. I'll come back now. I'll move back to Tim's point, and accept that the suggestion on behalf of the board to look at the technical breaches against the cruelty breaches. We had a good discussion last week about, an operator accidentally being unaware of not knowing that a water bowl had broke or was leaking and there was no water, compared to someone who's intentionally mistreated an animal to get it to move, and the differences in those, and we'll look at those. On Margaret's point about your concern around the extreme cases of repeat breaches, we have a legal obligation that James will hopefully support if necessary, where we've got to consider a new business entity. So if we do remove the approval of a business for whether it be hygiene or welfare or both breaches, if they come back with a new set of directors or a new business entity, we're legally obliged to consider their application. We wouldn't grant full approval straight away. We would give them conditional approval, and we would monitor that business very closely to make sure that the practices the people involved previously had either improved or had been removed, and that can take up to 6 months to give them the full approval status. Obviously, if somebody had been barred from operating a business or for welfare reasons, the handling of animals, we would consider that in the application as well. Frank's point on CCTV, accepting that you're a new board member, Frank, and you'll have picked up that CCTV was mandated in Wales last year. Wales were 5 years behind England, so it was already in England. So we've had CCTV, and it is used in England daily. So there's instructions to our vets and meat inspectors to monitor a period of CCTV randomly daily, depending on the size, the nature of the business. And the figures do tell me that we've got, of the breaches identified at Slaughterhouse, 23% of them were using CCTV. And what that tells us then, if we identify a breach and we've got a 15 or 30-minute check a day, we can increase the focus of that. We can look at other areas. We can better target that business or individuals within that business to look for more breaches, or to make sure that we've got assurance on them handling the animals. Fiona's point, I think, around about the non-compliances and whether or not we're looking at across multiple different points in each business. What we can use here is our themed audit, our annual themed audit. So if we've seen a spike in the movement of animal allergies, our themed audit for next time could properly assess that area in more of a focus. So we can move that around from year to year on that. Again, if we've got spikes with certain types of businesses, we can maybe look at our instructions and advice to staff as to what they're looking at within that business. The themed audit recently, and I didn't have time to cover everything in my opening, but was recently identified some areas for improvement with the backup stunning equipment being in place, or the process for handling animals that are in gestation or they've just given birth, and how the receipt and the handling of those, there are areas for improvement. On the third-party assurance schemes, Red Tractor and the RSPCA and others, that's slightly more complex. Yes, they do have their own sets of data, but not everybody's a member. A farm could be a member and sending animals to a slaughterhouse here, but not a member for sending animals to slaughterhouse there. And there's a very complex landscape there. What we do is we publish our open data on welfare breaches, and we can have discussions, and that's there for Red Tractor and other assurance schemes to use. But getting their data back in is difficult because their membership can change from month to month, as to some people being a member this month and not next month. There's costs to that for the businesses, and depending on the customers that they use. I think I covered Mark's points on that. I think finally, to come to the point on the demonstration of life. Yes, we are still promoting that protocol. It's owned by AHDB. They promote it themselves. We have seen another large slaughterhouse adopt that protocol in the last year. So we've got still a small number of that where they're following the protocol, so they're not the non-stun slaughter numbers are maintained, but we do still see the increase to sheep And there is a value, there's a trade and a value to that of the non-stun halal sheep products that is permitted. And we've talked to the business operators again around considering using the demonstration of live protocol, but again, it's a business choice for them, and we'll continue the work in that space.
Thank you very much, Kev. Just to follow up on that, do we think that the increase in the non-stun slaughter is primarily serving the export market? Because in a way that's sort of relevant in thinking about whether we do press for greater labelling of production standards in the UK if most of this is actually being exported.
I haven't got the figures on the amount of domestic versus exported products, but there is a value to it, and AHDB themselves will promote the trade of those products because it's the benefit of the farmers who are producing the animals. So it's a difficult one. We haven't got figures on that.
Thank you. We're all being slightly distracted by a buzzing, which I think the tech team are trying to fix. But Kev, thank you very much. Oh, Richard, do you want to just come in?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I wanted to make the point about, it's been mentioned a few times about repeated breaches, because I think that's where the crux of the issue lies and where we can make the biggest difference. We've run a number of analysis exercises over the last year that have looked at slaughterhouses with repeated animal welfare breaches over a period and worked very closely with Robert Locker and his field operations team in making sure that we're confident that the right enforcement action, the appropriate enforcement action has been taken in a timely manner, and that, you know, if that results then ultimately in the withdrawal of approval, then that's something that we will get on and do. So that's a process that will continue to repeat, because technical breaches can happen, mechanical breakdowns can happen, but where we see repeated breaches, it's often because of a lack of controls, food safety, animal welfare controls, or it's a cultural issue. And those are the hotspots that we're really keen to drill down on. And then just finally, I wanted to come back to the local authority resourcing point, and we're very conscious that local authorities can't deal with every single referral that we send them. But, you know, when we're seeing the same transport companies, the same drivers and the same poor behaviours, or when we're seeing farms sending animals in a really poor state to the abattoir, our vets on site are obviously very passionate about that, and we'll pull that evidence together, and it's our job to make that as clear as possible to DEFRA and to AFRA and local authorities, so we're really focusing on where we can make the biggest difference. And the conversation with DEFRA now is about how do we maybe tweak that governance so that it's more DEFRA-led, and therefore, you know, there's more pressure on APHA and those local authorities to take that action that we need them to.
That's really encouraging to hear that, Richard. Thank you. Margaret, did you?
Can I just add to that, because actually I raised it before, but it's a very difficult thing to raise, so it's great that you raised it, Susan. It's such a sensitive area. It's done for religious reasons, and it is legal, but many animal lovers don't like the practice, so as you put it, cultural, really important. And over the years, actually the board has discussed it, and some members have said, you know, should we be actually getting rid of the practice? And again, very religiously sensitive. So, but it isn't really for us, is it? It's not our remit.
No, it's not. But I think it's right for us to have report on the numbers and to, you know, to think about whether informing consumers of it is in their interests.
And can I just also add Frank's point? I think that's really important as well, is how much is the CCTV actually, now it's been in for a while, how have we got it right, have they got it right, and how much it's actually being monitored?
Yeah, so I think I was going to say that. I mean, firstly, Kev. I'm so sorry. really pleased to hear that the CCTV is actually making a difference and helping us to identify additional breaches, but also that you are upping the amount of surveillance, the amount of viewing of the CCTV that you use when you're seeing these breaches occurring. So that sounds a intelligent protocol. I mean, I think all in all, what will be absolutely, certainly seems clear to me, and I hope is evident to the board and to others who are listening, is that our team care about this and are really very focused on trying to do everything we can to minimise animal welfare breaches. I've visited abattoirs. I've seen, talked to the vets and the meat hygiene inspectors working there, and I do want to thank them for all the work that they do day in, day out. To avoid bad things happening, but actually also for the majority of animals to ensure that actually that experience is as sort of good as it can be, and certainly that it's legally compliant. So thank you to all of those people in our field ops teams for the work they do. Thank you to Richard, Kev, and the people you have within the FSA who are overseeing this and setting the framework under which they operate. We need to keep a close eye on it. This paper will come back again. It's not a problem that's going to go away, but it's one we do need to stay on top of. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the next item. I should note that Robin May has had to leave us early, which I should have mentioned at the beginning, but forgot to. He's taking part in a cross-government event at 12 o'clock. So we'll move on to the next item now, which is another annual update. This is our annual Freedom of Information item, where we look at external complaints, whistleblowing, and a number of other items. We're joined by Noel Sykes and Jenny DeSera to tell us about this. I think they're sitting in our office in York, but by the wonders of technology, they're on the big screen in the room with us. So I'm going to allow them to introduce their paper in just a moment, which really, I think, is a paper which is absolutely crucial to demonstrating our commitment to being an open and transparent organisation. As is the case for all government departments, there is a degree of external scrutiny from the Information Commissioner, the Parliamentary Ombudsman, and Civil Service Commission, and so forth. And internally, we have ARAC, who pay close attention to this over the course of the year. So a little bit like we said earlier with the local authority paper, this is the annual report and an opportunity for us to think whether there's any strategic issues that we want to consider, and it's not the place for us to be getting into the minutiae of any individual cases. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Noel, I think, is going to introduce this paper.
Forgive me, Chair, it's Jenny that's going to start the paper.
I had a 50% chance of getting it right and failed.
Thank you, Susan. So yes, I'm going to talk about the Freedom of Information section of the paper, and this provides an overview of the service and the key statistics for the last 6 months of this year and the preceding 3 years. It also provides an insight into request volume trends over a longer term. I would like to emphasise some of the key points from the paper. The data in the annex shows that for 2024, the number of requests was in line with trend from previous years. There was a spike in requests in 2023, which aligned with a notable increase in requests for that year across all monitored public bodies. The figures for the first 6 months of this year indicate that in 2025 we may also have a marked increase in requests. There isn't anything that stands out as a single cause for this uptick in requests. And the topic of requests that we receive remains quite diverse. We've broken them down in the paper to offer an insight into the themes of the requests that we receive. I'd also like to take this opportunity to note that the compliance with statutory timescales for the Freedom of Information Act remains high for the Food Standards Agency. The report also shows that in 2024, there were 2 complaints made to the Information Commissioner's Office about the handling of freedom of information requests. And in both cases, the FSA's decision on disclosure of that information was upheld by the Information Commissioner. And finally, in closing, I just want to highlight that over the next year, my team will focus on publishing more freedom of information request responses on the FSA website, which will help to further promote transparency. It will also streamline handling requests about a topic that attracts multiple requests, so we can direct requesters directly to information that's already available. Thank you. I'll hand over to Noel now.
Yeah, thank you, Jenny. And I too will just highlight a few points from the sections relating to external complaints and internal whistleblowing. Our focus in last year has been resolving complaints at as close to the point of local delivery as possible. And the stats show that in large part that approach has been successful. We still see relatively small numbers of cases enter or tracked into formal complaints investigation routes. The report gives some insight into the subject areas of complaints and also lessons learned. On development work, since we last addressed the board, principally this has involved preparing the FSA to establish a complaints management process on the back of the Food Crime Officer's Complaint and Misconduct Regulations 2024. That's a regime that falls under the remit of the Independent Office for Police Conduct. And I'm pleased to say that we successfully established that arrangement, and it was tested back in the summer with the IOPC, and we think we're in pretty good shape should we see complaints be submitted. Just moving on to internal whistleblowing, the particular point I want to highlight is the results provided from the Civil Service People Survey around the Civil Service Code question. We still have a high level of confidence in our processes at near 80%, but this is work that needs to continue. We want to move forward and further, and my team will be, again this year and the year ahead, be focusing on how we might achieve even better results. Just before I hand back to you, Chair, just to highlight that Jenny and I are asking that 2 priorities in the paper are addressed by the board and receive its support. And I'll hand back to you, Chair, now, if I may, for any questions the board have.
Great, thank you very much to both of you. I think it's really reassuring for the board to see the very consistently high levels of compliance across each of these areas and the very sort of high performance. You know, this is, you two do a great job, your teams do a great job, but I think this actually just reflects the sort of culture across the FSA, and I really do want to acknowledge that. I think there's always more we can do, but we are, I think, in a pretty good place. That said, maybe others have spotted things that I haven't, and Louise, why don't you come in?
Thank you. I was going to look down there. Thank you for that. It was really interesting to hear, and some of the points you pulled out were sort of related to my questions or suggestions, really, I suppose. So I've got 2. One, on the people and your code questions. It's great that the FSA is actually ahead of the civil service benchmark, but is there an industry benchmark or a different benchmark that would help you keep continuing improving and raising your bar? Because actually you're already ahead, so actually how do you get further would be one. My second was on, it's a similar positioning really, where there seems to be an increase in requests for information this year in 2025. Are we able to look at that either against other government requests or industry requests to say, are we in line with those requests, and is it therefore an industry behaviour change, or actually do we have more interest in the FSA? So almost how do we benchmark that before we get another year on and think, actually, have we got a problem?
Good points there. Anything more from anyone? Oh, Rhian.
Thank you, and thank you for the paper. Just to follow on from Louise's comments, actually. So we are doing very well in terms of our staff's awareness of how to raise a concern. It does mean in the data that 25% of our staff are unsure about how to raise a concern. So in the spirit of that continuous improvement, any comments you might have would be interesting in terms of how we're continually narrowing that gap, I suppose, and raising awareness of our processes would be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the paper. It was just a question around the Speak Up programme. So I just wondered how we use the data to help us understand key themes and how this is fed back to the EMT and potentially the board, because that might help us understand some of the answers to the questions around the awareness of the code, etc.
Okay, so 3 questions for you there. Do you want to just respond to those and then I'll sum up?
Yeah, I'll go. Sorry, I'll go first if I may. In relation to benchmarking data, we don't currently use industry benchmarking data. We've tended to rely on the data that's collected across government because it's so wide-reaching across government. The People Survey is adopted by all government departments, and we feel that's a reliable insight into how well we are doing. That said, board members will have noted the news yesterday in relation to the advent or the imminent advent of the Public Office Accountability Bill, and I expect that that's going to put an increased focus more widely on ethical standards and compliance across government and more widely in the public sector. So I would expect and hope that we'll see emerge wider benchmarking data, but it's something we will certainly look at. On the Speak Up programme, and there was a question around better understanding the 25%, if you like, in relation to not understanding how to raise a concern. My reply connects those 2 points together, really, because we know from past experience by deep diving into the People Survey data, it can give us a very useful insight at a very local level in terms of teams across the FSA whom we need to work more closely with to build that awareness and that confidence. So we link up with the analytics team in our science directorate to get that further analysis, and we'll be doing that again this year. We know it works and we'll continue to do it and work more closely with those teams to drive that awareness forward. That was it from me, Jenny.
Thank you, Noel. Yeah, I'll respond on the question about the increase in requests predicted for this year. It is the case that we do get statistics from Cabinet Office of request volumes for all public monitored bodies. And we can see, and I have seen previously, that since the pandemic, there's been a general increase in freedom of information requests across really all major government departments. There was a decrease in 2020, and then since then there's been a rise. So the FSA is in line with that general trend. It is the case, though, that we do notice that requests certainly increase when the FSA is doing things with media interest. So we have seen, as I said in the paper last year, that things where we do get interest from the media, like Bovia or CPD, we do get requests that correspond with that, which is what you'd expect. So I think we are seeing a trend generally that there is more interest in the work of the FSA and what it's doing.
Thank you. I think Katie wanted to come in.
Sorry, I thought I'd switched it on. Just for those who haven't encountered the People Survey much before, it's an incredibly rich source of data. There are a set of questions in it that go beyond the 3 we've mentioned here. It asks about people's experiences of bullying and harassment, for example. It asks a whole set of questions about people's engagement with their organisation that give us really rich data about how our staff are feeling and acting as a result. And we can cut it not only by different areas of the FSA, but also by protected characteristics and things like that. So it's always done in a way that's completely anonymised. But we have an awful lot of data that feeds into how we design these campaigns and who we engage with. And we also run regular pulse surveys in between. We've launched the next People Survey now. It's sort of going at the moment. So I just thought it was useful to give that explanation for those who haven't encountered it.
Thanks. Just a quick question on the back of that. What percentage of staff respond? So is it a useful data set in terms of the number of people taking part?
And the answer is?
Unless Noel can give you the exact figure,
Well,
my answer will be yes, it's a useful data set. That we have a very high response rate.
So we're in the, what, 70s and 80s, or?
I think so, yeah.
Hi, okay. Actually, given, well, there's a couple of things. It might be worth maybe in the next just board briefing, just adding a little bit more detail or a link to the, we've previously had things to the board about the people survey. We can just cover that off. Noel, thank you very much for reminding me about the new Public Office Accountability Bill, which people might have heard of as Hillsborough Law. That was published just yesterday. So this is a bill which contains a duty on all public authorities to maintain and promote ethical conduct, including through codes of conduct. It requires the organisational to have a sort of code of ethics, including disciplinary consequences for failing to comply. I was going to do this after the meeting, but I can see, since James is here, is going to ask James if he would do a formal note to the board, really just reminding everybody of their responsibilities, and in particular highlighting any new clauses and conditions which have come up through this bill. And I'd also ask that Katie finds appropriate ways of communicating to all of our staff, because I just think it's a timely moment to remind people of those responsibilities. Okay, on that note, I think I'm going to stop. Thank you so much. It is reassuring to see we're doing well, but there's always chance to do better, and I know the two of you will keep driving that performance across the organisation. So thank you very much indeed for that. Okay. We'll move on to the next item. And we've caught up a little bit of time as well, so delighted that we'll have a real opportunity to hear more about the work that we do in Wales, and delighted to welcome Sian Bosley to the table to introduce what is her first paper as Director for Wales. I want to take this opportunity again really to highlight that the Wales team sits within Angeli's wider UK and International Affairs Directorate, and much of what the team do in Wales is really just part of the wider FSA effort, ensuring that our work genuinely has that four-nation context. Of course, we're also keen to respond to any specific priorities that are expressed by the Welsh Government, and I really want to thank the team in Wales who do so much to build and maintain those relationships with Welsh Government, so that we are kept up to date with what matters there. And of course, also what feeds into that is the Welsh Food Advisory Committee that Rhian leads, which is a good way of us hearing from stakeholders. I'm not going to say any more. I'll hand over to you, Sian, just to give us the summary of progress this year, and I guess most importantly, priorities for the upcoming year.
Pnawn da, and thanks for the introduction, Chair. The point you made there around us being part of UKIA is extremely important, as it guarantees that we as the FSA provide a three-country lens to all our policy and delivery work, ensuring that we ensure consistent food and feed safety messages to consumers wherever they are across the UK. And in Wales, importantly, we do so in Welsh and in English. This is my first report to the board as Director of Wales since I took over from Nathan Barnhouse last October. And I'm pleased to say that we've made progress on the key areas identified in that last paper. These are detailed in the paper, and I won't go into them in any detail. Across all the team's work, we are committed to the collaboration agreement in Wales, which we co-developed with local authorities, Welsh governments, and the Welsh Local Government Association. I've additionally focused on three key areas in my time here, which dovetail nicely into those. They are first embedding the one FSA way of working across the team in Wales, and that includes identifying areas where the team can lead on certain topics and make tangible progress. This includes As Ria and I think Karen has already alluded to, enhanced registration. As part of the collaborative agreement, the Minister in Wales asked us to explore enhanced registration. I am pleased to say that the team are currently piloting this with local authorities in Wales, ahead of returning to this board and to the Minister on the results of that exploratory phase. As you saw in the LA performance paper presented this morning, there are a large number of unrated premises and new food businesses registering on a daily basis, adding pressure on resources within local authorities. This project looks at what is needed to ensure these are genuine food businesses so that officials can focus their efforts where it's genuinely needed. Secondly, delivering through a devolved lens. As you'll all be aware, food and feed policy is devolved, and our aim is to be able to make progress on a 3 or 4 nation basis as far as possible. That is the consumer and business expectation, and my team is responsible for taking forward FSA policy priorities in Wales. This includes securing ministerial approval for market authorisations, changes to high-risk food not of animal origin, import requirements, and updating the Food Law Code of Practice. I continue to work with Welsh Government officials to make this process as efficient as possible. And thirdly, which I'm proud of, the Welsh language provision. We continue to provide business and consumer information in the Welsh language in line with the Welsh Language Act. Our work is consistently highly commended by the Welsh Language Commissioner, and just last week, case studies of our work on consumer campaigns and information were highlighted as best practice at the Commissioner's Conference, attended by other regulators and public bodies across Wales. My second priority was expanding our reach into Welsh Government, and that will become increasingly important in the year ahead as we look towards the May Senedd election, where we'll see the Senedd expand from 60 to 96 members, a move to a closed proportional list system, voting for a party rather than a person, similar to that here in Northern Ireland, and reducing constituencies from 40 to 16. I'm glad to say that last week we presented on the work of the FSA at the Welsh Government Food Forum, making key linkages with Welsh Government colleagues leading on food innovation, nutrition and dietary health. Thirdly, expanding our reach and influence with key Welsh stakeholders, be that our key delivery partners in local authorities, businesses in the food sector, our food innovation centres, academia and trade bodies. Recent successes here are presenting FSA priorities and ARFS findings to the Wales Food and Drink Industry Board last week, and just yesterday presenting on our work on earned recognition to council leaders who lead on public health in Wales. In addition to our usual work, over the coming year, my team will be engaging fully with Welsh Government officials and ministers ahead of and after the Senedd election in May. My team were yesterday showcasing FSA work to Senedd members in the monthly Afarchnad event. It's an event in the Senedd where we can talk to AMs on a monthly basis. And to help shape the Welsh Government's agenda, where we have evidence, expertise or work that can be of use. For example, on the community food strategy, the work on high fat, salt and sugar foods, and in delivering on the ambition within the Future Generations Act and specific actions on food. We will continue our engagement plan with ministers, members of the Senedd, local authorities and businesses over the autumn. And we look forward to welcoming you, Chair, and Katie to Wales over the coming months. And if I may, Chair, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank my team for the professionalism and dedication they show, whatever the challenge they face, and for sterling work in supporting me deliver on FSA priorities in Wales. Diolch yn fawr. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Sian. And I'll go to Rian first, actually, just for a sort of comment as the board member for Wales.
Thank you, Susan. And thank you, Sian. I'll echo your thanks to your team and yourself. It's great, you know, that we're have a focus on the Welsh consumer, delivering the FSA's work across Wales and trying wherever we can to work across the nation. So I was pleased that you emphasised that at the beginning. No, I would just say, you know, there's a breadth of work there, which you've explained, and we've got the paper. I think over the last 12 months, particularly our local authority engagement, we've really seen an increase there, which I think is very well received in Wales and by the Minister. And so you were rightly continuing to focus on that. I think you mentioned the Senedd elections coming up, very important in Wales, quite disruptive perhaps, potentially. And I think you've probably covered it, but you know, our strategy in Wales, you know, how we're going to continue to engage with the Senedd members who are currently in post, as well as try and raise awareness amongst new members, whomever they may be, is quite a task in Wales, because there is a big expansion of the membership coming up. So I think keeping that strategy front and centre for the next months is, you're right to point that out. In terms of the forward look, we are awaiting the review that was commissioned by Welsh Government. I know that review is closed and the findings are in train, but I don't know if you've got any further information about whether we might get to see that review, how much of it might be published. Obviously, we want to know what we can do better as an FSA, but also whether there's an impact on our stakeholders, local authorities, I'm thinking particularly. So whether you've got any comment on that. And just finally, perhaps, I really welcome the work that you're doing with the WJEC. So we've talked a lot about resource in this meeting, we always do, and I think some of that grassroots bilingual support for training in Wales is really important. And I know, you know, the team is only a certain size in Wales, we can only do so much, but I think it is key to what we do that is particular in the region. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Rhian. And I'd just like to echo the point about engagement with local authorities. And in particular, I was pleased to see the work going forward on the enhanced registration project, because I know that that was particularly important to Welsh Government. So let me open it up for other comments, and then I'll come back to Sian just to pick up and respond to Rhian. Louise.
The only comment I'd got actually was somehow the passion came through in your paper. So for me, it was really interesting seeing the sort of a Welsh perspective come to life, but through the FSA lens. And I'm a month in learning about fully of the FSA, but actually all the topics that have been inducted to us as new board members were all coming through. So one of your questions is, are we delivering the Welsh version of the FSA? Yes, I think so. But actually the passion that came through and the spin on it into Wales was really encouraging to see.
Thank you. Sian, why don't you respond to Rhian, and then we'll see if there's anything else before we wrap up.
Thank you, Chair. And on that last point, I hope I am delivering for the FSA in Wales and FSA. That's my role, but I'm really grateful for those comments, and I'm glad that came through in the paper. On Rhian's point on the review, I'll keep it fairly high level, and for those of you who weren't aware on the board, earlier this year, Welsh Government confirmed that the long-awaited review of the FSA in Wales was going ahead and is being delivered by the Cardiff Metropolitan University. My team has worked with the research team during the initial desktop review period and the final interview stage, and we are currently awaiting the publication of those recommendations. They will go in front of the Health Minister in Wales first, and then we will potentially see those recommendations published by the end of this year. But can I thank you as Chair, Rhian as WFAC Chair, Katie and Angeli for being involved in those interviews over the last few months.
Thank you. I think Rhian was absolutely right to point to the uncertainty that inevitably comes whenever there's an election coming up. But I think what we need to remember is one of the real assets that the FSA brings to the system is that our job continues, and it continues, you know, through elections and out the other side. And whilst it's obviously important that we're vigilant to, you know, the sort of priorities that are being set by government, there's a huge amount of underpinning work, and we just need to not get too distracted by the noise and to press on and deliver. It's often harder to get the same level of ministerial engagement, but we'll continue to work on that. And I was very pleased that Robin and I had a very good introductory meeting with the new CMO in Wales, as people know, Frank stood down recently, but has been replaced by Dr. Elizabeth Oliver. And we had a really useful meeting to sort of ensure that she really understood the remit and the role of the FSA. I mean, she has a good idea because she came from UK HSA, but then to talk about how we might work together more effectively in Wales. And we've committed to maintaining that as a regular meeting. So I think that will help us and will be a useful point of contact through a period of potential, slightly harder to make contact directly with ministers. Anything more that anybody wanted to add? Fiona.
Thank you, Susan. And I agree with what Louise said. It's a very enthusiastic and positive report. Thank you. I'm interested to find out more about the work we do with supplements. I think it would be really helpful for the board to have a public paper to set out what work we do in that area. It's growing and it's really unwieldy, and there's lots of grey territory between what's a food and what's a supplement. And I just think it would be helpful to have something out there that explains what our role is there. Thank you.
That's maybe a broader question than just Wales, I suspect. I don't know if Rebecca wants to comment on that, or Sean, either of you.
Well, I think my team in Wales look after the supplements work on behalf of the FSA in England and Wales. So I think, but we can definitely come back on that. We'll provide more information in time. Thank you.
Anything more? My goodness, that's very, very short, but I'm sure a short discussion sometimes is just evidence of a really comprehensive and very clear paper, Sean. So thank you very much indeed for that. And thanks to all your team for their work. Okay, that brings us to some of the more routine items that we have regularly on our agenda, starting with the, well, actually, this isn't a routine, this is the annual report from ARAC. And then I think we will just ask Anthony at the same time to go on and just give us the report from the September ARAC board. But let's start with the annual report. And as ever, huge thanks to Anthony for chairing ARAC, which really does a very, very important and very solid job for the FSA as a whole. But as chair, I'm absolutely delighted that somebody else chairs ARAC and keeps such a careful, close eye on it. Hugely grateful also to members of the board who sit on ARAC, who have a lot of papers to read, as some of our new members discovered. And I think it's been incredibly helpful over the last year, Anthony, to see the training that you're putting in place for all the members of ARAC, which I know they're finding useful and really equipping them to be able to fulfill their responsibilities better than ever. So thank you to you, and thank you to the members of ARAC for all you're doing and all you will do in the coming year.
Thank you, Susan. Well, I'm delighted to present my annual report. It's quite straightforward, and I don't plan to go through it in any great detail today, but there are a few bits that I thought it would be worthwhile to highlight. Section 3 outlines some of the key events in the 24-25 period. This is from 1st of April 24 to 31st of March 25. These include the annual report on accounts, which I'm glad to say received a clean audit opinion from the National Audit Office. We also assessed the various internal and regulatory audits that were conducted during the period. And at 3.6, I've highlighted that in May 2025, which is slightly outside of the reporting period, I actually commissioned an internal audit review, a short review into the processing of reviewing abattoirs when non-compliance has been escalated to the point where their approval to operate may be suspended. As indicated, the review gave a moderate assurance opinion, which was good to see. I'm aware the colleagues from AIMS have asked some written questions in relation to this, and we'll reply to those in writing following this meeting as usual. The report also highlighted the fact that we have again conducted an annual effectiveness review of ARAC. This is a self-assessment tool that is promoted by Treasury, and we followed the tool that is actually set out by the National Audit Office. It highlighted a few areas where we could do slightly better, such as assurance mapping, global internal audit reporting standards, and Treasury's ARAC handbook, where members would like a bit more training and development. And as you've indicated, I put that training in place, and there is a schedule over the coming year to do that. Just dropping quickly into the September audit review, it was again very standard. We touched on a couple of limited audit reports that we took care of. But the real focus was in the afternoon session, where we focused on regulatory audit, because I particularly wanted to get the new members to understand that there are two types of internal audit within the FSA. Obviously the governance audit that internal audit normally do, but also the regulatory audit and the importance that it has in maintaining and ensuring public and health in terms of food and food safety. So we did all of that. I would like to actually put on record now my thanks to Mark for his input to ARAC over the years, but most especially also to Margaret as Deputy Chair, both of whom will be stepping down, and welcoming, as you've indicated, the new members who have joined ARAC. But that's it, and happy to take any questions.
Great, thank you very much. And yes, Mark's a relatively new entrant, I think, to ARAC, but Margaret has done many years of real service as Deputy Chair, and I'm grateful to you for just reminding me of that. And yeah, particular thanks, Margaret, for all that work. And you've got a job ahead of you, Anthony, to find her successor. Any questions to ARAC on their report? Any comments from any of the ARAC members, if you want to add anything to that? Margaret, if it's not putting you on the spot, I wonder if you've got any little homilies or points to note for your successors.
I think the deep dives we do are good and are actually at a pinnacle. We've reached a good place there. We had a really good chat over incidents, a long chat, and when we do get these limited audits, which aren't that frequent and are always a little bit difficult for staff, I think it's good that we really go through them with a fine-tooth comb, which we have been doing. So thank you to that. And then the people in the room who've been chairs, Tim and also Anthony, both of them inspirational. So thank you. And the staff, fantastic. The staff who support that particular committee.
Good. Warm words all round. Thank you for the work. Long may it continue. And yes, I think that probably is all we need to say on that item. So, Tim, moving on to the Business Committee, and this is really the oral report on the meeting that we held last week. Just a reminder to people that the papers from that meeting are included in the papers for this board, and the full minutes from the Business Committee will be available in due course.
Thanks for that, Susan. Yes, so I guess, seeing as we're handing out the thanks at the moment, the big thanks, I think, is also to the Secretariat for turning round the note of the meeting, because it was on a very pressing timetable. It's a slightly longer note than usual, but I think that actually reflects the level of the work that Business Committee and its members are now putting in to scrutinising performance and really getting under the skin, I think, of some of the issues, and some of which we've actually already covered today. So I'll try and just keep to the salient points that we covered in the meeting, and which add hopefully some value to the earlier conversations. And I guess one of the first ones is just to pick up on incidents. Incidents has been certainly in our sights because of the number of incidents, and trying to understand the reality against the reporting data. And I think that's a theme actually that will recur throughout this, is that the acuity of the data and an interpretation of it to tell us where we really need to direct resource is a key issue, I think, for Business Committee to try and understand how performance can be improved and where it's reasonable to focus that improvement and resource. And certainly on instance, we are starting to see that there is we're on a trajectory for improvement, but that improvement will be affected a lot by this, how we use the data. And so we are seeing a transition as we use new data approaches, so that we're getting better information to inform our response, and so that we can really understand where there's signal against background noise. And I think that's really important, because we don't want to undersell the activity that the FSA is doing. We want to be able to respond ahead of time to the circumstances that lead to incidents and be able to deal with them effectively and efficiently. And we still think there's a focus to be had here, but we are reassured that if we can start to see better through the improvements around data, then we're going to get a much clearer vision of what's going on. The other one I want to pick up, again, on a similar vein, was about local performance figures. We put a lot of discussion and scrutiny on this. We've obviously picked that up in the annual report earlier in the agenda. And there are some nuggets of good news in amongst this, as well as obviously the concern about how we're going to grapple with what looks to be a big backlog. New establishments that haven't yet been assessed. But I think there is assurance for us around the high-risk establishments being prioritised. I mentioned earlier around the food standards delivery model, and that's coming on stream well. I think that we will keep on to the detail. We picked up some of the generalities in the earlier item, but this is going to be very much a focus for the Business Committee going forward. And the other one where I think we focused quite considerable attention was around the market authorisations and the throughputs. And you'll see in the notes that we've requested to get reports back on what the expected throughputs are likely to be, and to assure ourselves, I think, that we're doing whatever we can in terms of the current processes to manage them effectively, but also that where it needs into a discussion that's not for the Business Committee, but more about strategic implications, we're handling that effectively as well. And last, it's always good to have some good news to finish off with. Susan's already mentioned it and we've covered earlier, but in terms of the regulation action plan, really good, solid progress. It's a great representation of what the FSA can do, and we're really getting ahead of that. There are obviously, as in any process, there are potential risks along the way, but those are risks that we recognise and are actually managed within that full trajectory. And last but not least is the cell culture proteins sandbox, which has been a wonderful exemplar, I think, of how you start to design a process, how you regularise it, and the engagement, I think, with industry and stakeholders has been exemplary. And what we've been monitoring is the progress through the development plan for that, and I think we can give it a good big tick. So thanks for that, and if there's any questions, I'd be very happy to take them.
Thank you very much, Tim. Before I just open it up to questions, I'm conscious that both in the ARAC report and with Business Committee, there was mention about incidents, and without any real detail in that. And Katie, I wonder if I might ask you, because incidents, of course, is an incredibly important part of what we do. It just might be helpful for people to hear where your current thinking is and some of the work that you've got in train in relation to incidents.
Yes, certainly. And I think just to paint the picture, when we heard in the Business Committee, we look at the incidents data that we're currently dealing with twice as many incidents as we say we have capacity to deal with. So that is flashing red. And we looked at ARAC at an internal audit on incidents, which gave us a lot of areas to consider as one of those limited opinions that we were discussing. That audit was done about 6 months earlier, before a set of changes have been made to the case management system. We have just implemented and are bedding down a new case management system. And I just wanted to say, Junior, Darren and the teams have done a huge amount of work on that with Julie's team. And that is going to be really important for the FSA going forwards. First of all, we hope it will enable us to have more confidence in the data. And because we're transitioning onto the new system, as Tim said, there are several areas where we're not 100% sure that we're looking at the right data at the moment. So there is a piece of work underway to get the right data. Julie's commissioned some work to look at what the data is actually telling us, and Junior's commissioned some work to look at how we classify the incidents. At the moment, the data is telling us that 87% of the incidents we deal with are high or medium priority. So the picture we're getting is of an unsustainable workload, effectively. The new case management system is helping. We're already getting some good anecdotal evidence that it is speeding things up in terms of the admin tasks. I think there is more automation, more that we can do there. Julie has just completed an internal project for me looking at the way in which we use sources of information and data to manage risk in the food system, that has picked up on this further and identified more opportunities for improvement and automation in the incidents process. So I'm expecting us to put in train, as part of some of our internal reform work, more work to improve the incidents process. So probably not more to say about that right now, but I just want to reassure the board that it's a big focus for us and that we are drawing together those threads that are coming up through those committees.
Thank you very much. As I said, this is a really big issue for the FSA. It's largely an operational issue. When incidents happen, we need the team to step up and roll out the process. So it's the board's job to do all we can to sort of critically appraise that process, and also to really understand what our role is in an incident. And just to say that later this year we'll be planning some work, well, I was going to say for new board members, prompted by new board members, but really refresher for all of us, really thinking through and doing some work about the board's role in responding to incidents. So, you know, it's, yeah, we're well, both Katie and I in our own separate ways are kind of on the case, I think, with incidents. Anything else from Tim's report that people wanted to comment on? Mark?
Yeah, thanks, Susan. I just wanted to pick up, if I may, on Tim's report and actually reflecting back to Katie's report to the Business Committee, the result that the NFCU achieved with their first custodial sentences. It's a really important result for that team, really important that we as an agency hold those criminals to account using the criminal justice system. But it's also really important that we use that as a deterrent in terms of deterring others from undertaking that kind of criminal activity. And I just wanted to check, really, that we are using every opportunity in the cycle of that kind of prosecution to publicise and deter others. Generally, there are 5 opportunities in that cycle: the arrest stage, the charging stage, conviction, sentencing, and then proceeds of crime. And I just would like some assurance that we're using all 5 opportunities to deter other criminal activity.
Well, I've certainly seen some activity in promoting that, but Claire, I wonder if you wanted to just tell us a little bit more about how we try to disseminate the sort of NFCU successes.
Yeah, we've been working very closely with the NFCU in recent months on a couple of the successes that you've referred to there, Mark. And I think one of the things that we see is that actually they get very good response rates. So stories about enforcement really do not only generate headlines, but actually generate a very positive response from the public as well. So it's definitely a positive strand of our communications approach.
Is there anything in particular, Mark, where you think we're missing a trick?
I've seen the stories around conviction. I haven't necessarily seen those at the other stages, and I think that, you know, we have the opportunity with one piece of work, and it's a massive amount of work in each of these prosecutions, to actually use that deterrent, as I say, up to 5 times. So we just encourage us to think more broadly in terms of how often we use the same story.
That's an important point, particularly how long these things take to reach their final end point. It may be that we should be doing a little bit more earlier on. Claire?
Yeah, we can certainly have a look at that. I mean, there are obviously times in which we're restricted in what we can say publicly because of ongoing legal issues or whatever. And we're also very reliant on collaboration from other authorities. So usually the press releases that we do in these kinds of instances are joint with police forces or local authorities or whatever. So, but certainly I'll take that away with the team and we can have a look at that.
Margaret, were you trying to come in?
it's just going back and actually responding to both of you talking about incidents. And I just want to say that Darren and Jodie and Junior and Richard and Kevin and all their teams work so hard. And this summer they've been doing business as usual and implementing the first draft of new reforms. And they are doing their absolute best to do what's right for the FSA. They'd be the first to say we're not there yet, but they have made huge improvements since that original audit. And then on incidents, it's a sort of classic example where we've discussed it now, it seems, and the staff have presented at business and a little bit at board and at ARAC and possibly even to the two devolved FACs. And just a reminder that A, if something can be discussed in public, it should be, and B, is it necessary to have quite so many briefings that staff have to do? Are we getting too much into duplication under our relatively new structures? Just a reminder, I'm not saying we are, just raising the issue, and a reminder that actually the Food Standards Act says we have to be open and transparent with the public. Not a criticism, just an idea.
I shall feel you on my shoulder, Margaret, as we go forward. Thank you, everybody. So if there's nothing else for Tim arising from the Business Committee, then we will go to hearing quick summaries of the work that the Food Advisory Committees have been doing. And why don't we start with Wales, since we've heard a bit about that already.
Thank you, Susan. Yeah, so WFAC then. So as a committee, we've welcomed 2 new members onto our committee recently. So Ivan Lloyd is a vet, recently retired and very well networked within Wales from his professional activities. And also John Richards, who works for the meat levy body in Wales, Hybu Keep Cymru, is an expert in the red meat sector. So those 2 new committee members really enhance our ability to do what we're supposed to be doing, which is striving to provide ourselves, the FSA and Welsh Government with those kind of a mechanism to gather the views of the Welsh consumer and also the food landscape stakeholders in Wales. So we try to do that at every opportunity, you know, respecting some matters are devolved and how we navigate that, and that's Sian's job with Anjali and the team, as well as trying to make sure we work across the nations and stay with the other nations wherever we possibly can. So, so new members, Sian's report captures all our summer engagements, so I won't repeat those. Just one mention that at Business Committee last week we had a full data set, and one of the metrics we have is about the awareness of the FSA in the different nations, and in Wales it's highest, which I take that as a win. We should all take it as a win. So however we're doing that, to be a pip ahead in terms of awareness, we should keep doing it. I suspect anecdotally, as a relatively small community, we probably are quite connected to all our stakeholders, local authorities being mentioned in this meeting, perhaps particularly. But that's a good one, and we should take that. And I think our bilingual working also helps in that sense as well. I don't think I need to mention enhanced registration. We certainly have during the meeting, or LA engagement. So I think for me, just thanking Susan, actually. We had a day of thanks, but you know, Susan, I think your ongoing commitment to engage with ministerially in Wales and with other stakeholders is very much appreciated. So we're grateful for that. And I know we've got hopefully a meeting in the diary in October with Minister Sarah Murphy, so we can exchange views there and get an update. And then a plug. So Wales has a flagship conference every year called Taste Wales, Blas Cymru, and that's happening on October 22nd and 23rd. Susan and I will be there for a part of that, but anybody who fancies crossing the border, do let us know, and take advantage of a very large gathering of stakeholders at that event. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Rhian, yeah, thank you to the Food Advisory Committee. It was great to meet the new members when we had the launch of the annual report, and I sensed a real energy amongst both of them to really make a difference. That was lovely. Any comments? If not, we'll turn to the Food Advisory Committee here in Wales, and welcome to those members from NIFAC who are with us here today. And it was great to meet many more of them yesterday when we had the opportunity to have lunch together. One of the great, there are many reasons for us going around each of the countries in our board meetings. It's fantastic to meet with some of our staff who work in those other offices. It's great to meet with the Food Advisory Committees and, of course, with some of our local stakeholders. So it's been a really, really good couple of days. Anthony, what else have you been up to whilst we've not been here? Or what's your committee been up to whilst we've not been here?
Well, the committee's been up to quite a lot since you were last here. Certainly from our meeting in June, NIFAC's had one themed meeting, which was on operational delivery and horizon scanning. And as part of this, committee members had an opportunity to look at the different scenarios which provide members with an opportunity to see and understand more about the complexities associated with the work and understanding more about the practical outworkings. The next themed meeting will be next month, which will look at local authority engagement. And you've seen we've had quite a lot of that today, but it is quite a big area, and we do work very closely with Northern Ireland. We're a very small place and we all know each other, so it sometimes makes this easier, and it sometimes makes it more difficult because you really do know the issues and the people. We had the meeting last week for board preparation, but in the end of June, NIFAC members turned up, as you've indicated, to the launch of the annual report. But it is good to recognise that also the two ministers turned up at that event, and then the two ministers we met on Monday as well. So the level of engagement in Northern Ireland, both with the FACs and with our ministerial colleagues, is excellent, and I think there's a very good rapport. We've also welcomed some new members as well, including David here, David Torrance, who is also a vet and a former colleague in DERA. So the breadth of knowledge and experience is continuing to increase. We work well together as a team and offline in between, and it really is just trying to leverage the networks that we have here now and really get information not just flowing from this board out, but actually from Northern Ireland back up, and that's the aim over the next years, to do much more of that.
Thank you. Any questions? If not, thank you. Thanks to the committee, and thanks to both Anthony and Rhian for, again, all your work in focusing the committee on topics and bringing their contributions to this board. That's great. So this is the moment where I just ask whether there is any other business that people have remembered that they'd forgotten at the start of the meeting or now occurs to them. And if not, just before I ask if there's any questions from the people who are here today, I think what today has been a really useful reminder is that although the board rightly spend a lot of our time thinking and worrying about the new things and the changes and what's about to come and trying to do that horizon scanning and that future strategy, there's actually a huge amount of ongoing work and indeed ongoing change and reform needed in lots of our very, very core activities. So we've heard, several, we started off talking about foodborne disease, absolutely at the heart of the FSA, still clearly need to do more work there. But then, the conversation, we've had a huge amount about local authorities and quite a lot about incidents has popped up in multiple ways. And, there's just never an opportunity to stand still. And it is putting enormous pressure on the organisation to be trying to do the day job, to reform the way we do those core tasks and to do them better and more efficiently, because that's what we all want to do. Nobody wants to do things which aren't a good use of time, but also to do those thinking ahead things. And I'm slightly astonished that we haven't had much discussion about the SPS agreement, which is and the EU reset, which is really overlaying a lot of our work. So as ever, there's a lot on. Thanks for everything that has been done, but I'm sorry to say there is still a whole lot more to be done in the coming few months and years. Okay, before we close, are there any questions from any of the people who've been sitting listening to us today? Doesn't look like there are, so I'll take this opportunity to thank everyone, wish you safe travels home, and I'll close the meeting and look forward to seeing everybody again for our next public board meeting, which will be in December and will be held in Reading, but we'll see board members prior to that for our retreat in October, when we'll get into some of the detail about these about some of these knotty areas. Thank you.